Good morning. My name is John Bolton. I'm an active duty Army officer currently enrolled at the Johns Hopkins School of International Studies, pursuing a PhD in foreign policy focused on U.S.-China relations. This morning, I'm joined by my co-host, Deja Gainey. She's a foreign policy MA student. The purpose of today's Heartland trip is to provide information, perspective, and understanding about the influence and effects of American foreign policy on the country's heartland. The end result of this event is an informal report relating Heartland concerns to SAIS students in the broader policy community. This year, SAIS is exploring my home state of Nebraska. Our virtual trip is split into 2 days. Yesterday, students and participants heard from business leaders, including the Chamber of Commerce, Cattlemen's Association, and the Nebraska Corn Board. Today's event is focused on business and military institutions in Nebraska. Before we begin, let me note that this event is on the record. The format is a revolving panel where guests are given approximately 1 hour each. Deja and I have asked each participant to provide 5 to 20 minutes of comments on issues they feel best related American foreign policy to the heartland, ranging from trade to visas and beyond. Afterward, the remainder of the time is open for Q&A. Please submit your questions via the Q&A button as soon as you can, and the moderator, me, will read them to the participant. If for some reason the Q&A button doesn't work for you, you can simply type it in the chat. Our first guest is Ms. Cindy Allen. She's the Assistant Nebraska Secretary of State. Ms. Allen has extensive experience involvement in international agricultural trade, both on the personal and professional level. She is one of 30 members of the nationwide USDA Agricultural Policy Advisory Committee to the U.S. Trade Representative. She's a member of the USDA Global Food Security Strategy Committee. She's a former board member of the Nebraska Agricultural Leadership Council and currently serves on the Nebraska International Trade Council. She's worked abroad extensively, traveling to Vietnam, Bulgaria, Japan, China, Turkey, and Cuba on various missions for the Nebraska governor in support of Nebraska agriculture, as well as to over 20 countries across the globe on behalf of the U.S. Dry Bean Council. She holds a bachelor's degree in economics from Bellevue University and an MA in political management from George Washington University. Ms. Cindy Allen.
Good morning. This is a frosty morning for us here in Nebraska, and it's a pleasure to be with everyone today from my home. I'm sorry I don't have the screen up. It's you can see my apartment behind me. Again, my name is Cindy Allen. I'm the Assistant Secretary of State for the state of Nebraska. The Secretary of State is the Chief Protocol Officer by statute for the state of Nebraska. We are charged with international trade, commerce, education, and culture. So it fits into my wheelhouse in my past of a lot of experience in international trade, especially in the agriculture sector. I serve on the APAC, it's called APAC Committee, Agriculture Policy Advisory Committee, and I have served on this committee in Washington, D.C. For the last 8 years. There's 30 of us across the United States that are selected to serve on the committee, and we represent different parts of agriculture, for instance, dairy or beef, oranges out of Florida, meat, and for my part, I represent the farming industry. So I have served through 2 different administrations on that committee. The first one was the Obama-Biden administration with Ambassador Michael Froman, who was negotiating the TPP trade agreement when I joined the committee. The Obama-Biden administration had a much different outlook as far as trade. It was more global in nature. We were negotiating TPP, and it included 11 different countries. There's some advantages to multilateral trade agreements because they tend to even out and make underdeveloped or developing countries more competitive. They also standardize import and exports as far as tariffs. And they also work to increase the standard of living in the underdeveloped or developing countries. The disadvantage of multilateral trade agreements is that a lot of companies that perhaps were US-based tend to move into other countries that have a lower standard of living. So the labor is a little bit cheaper, but the tariffs, they're the same. So it's more profitable for countries to move overseas than to stay in the United States. Then we transitioned to the Trump administration, And that administration with Ambassador Lighthizer tended to be a little more focused and targeted on bilateral trade agreements. Bilateral trade agreements specifically target those countries that tend to be have a better economy, where the produce and the manufacturing goods that are produced here in America, and of course in Nebraska as well, tend to get a higher price for their commodities. Bilateral trade agreements also limit tariffs. They avoid dumping products into countries. In other words, if you can make that product cheaper, like in multilateral agreements, if those products come into our Nebraska cheaper, then we can produce it here. It tends to kind of knock us out of the market. Where bilateral agreements, the good part about bilateral agreements is that it avoids this type of dumping into our markets. Let me give you an example of that. In Nebraska, we produce sugar beets, and we're very competitive in the sugar market. In fact, you probably buy sugar off the shelf, GH sugar, and those are sugar beets from the state of Nebraska that are produced here. When we were in a trade dispute or a trade war with another country, they dumped a lot of sugar into our markets. And what happened in Western Nebraska is the sugar beet producers really lost a lot of money. And when that happens, your balance sheet looks differently. And when you go to the bank, you know, the banker doesn't want to do business with you. And so you're kind of in a triage situation. So that is on the bilateral agreements, you avoid that type of dumping into the markets, which is good for our economy here in Nebraska, especially. The Trump administration was really far more targeted, and we were in the middle, and it was very aggressive trade. I was part of the USMCA trade agreement. When that trade agreement was negotiating, they had members of my committee, including myself, sit in a side room, and as the negotiators went back and forth, you know, between Canada and Mexico, they would come to the side room, they would talk to us about what they were negotiating, they would ask how it affected us, you know, on the farm, and processors, how it affected them, how it affected pharmaceutical companies or the financial services. You know, and then, you know, after they gathered that information, they would go back into trade talks with Mexico and Canada. So we had a lot of representation in that trade agreement, from the farm to the world, to Canada and Mexico, and what needed to be changed. So I was really thankful that we were able to do that. We were also invited to the Wto meetings, which oversees, you know, your a lot of your trade and a lot of the agreements between the countries. Well, I was also involved in some of the other trade agreements that are ongoing. Perhaps, you know, with the Biden administration coming in, I'm not quite sure where they're going to land, but we had ongoing talks with the UK. We were kind of in the middle of it. We have not scheduled another round of negotiations, but they are continuing to negotiate virtually and look at some of the challenges, you know, differences, and some of the things that they can agree upon. We were in the middle of that. We were in the middle of negotiating with Kenya, which was a very important negotiation going on, in the way that the EU has initiated a farm to fork program, which is a Green Deal program, and they have really tightened up their barriers to trade from the US. 35% of their imports are from Africa, and as a result, their farm to fork, or their Green Deal, has segued into the African market as well. I'll give you an example of what that means to us. Our consumers, they don't like wormholes in their apples, and they don't like weevil holes in their dry beans, and they don't want, they want everything uniform. They want their oranges uniform, or they want their apples uniform. There's the consumer in the US is very picky. So in order to produce for the consumer's market, we use insecticides or pesticides in our crops so that you don't have a worm in your apple and you don't have a larva, you know, in your dry beans. Well, the European Union, it's called a minimum residue level. So in all of your food, the EPA regulates it and will allow a certain minimum residue level of pesticide. That's why you wash your produce. Well, the EU, the minimum residue level is 0 for the EU. And there's no way you can get to 0. They also don't want GMOs exported into the European Union. So our corn and our wheat, and well, not wheat, but our corn is a GMO. They don't want hormone beef, you know, and I can tell you this, hormone beef, you know, or beef, or any beef that have antibiotic free. When your cattle are sick, you vaccinate your cattle, and yet when you don't vaccinate your cattle and you're producing antibiotic-free beef, well, if you have a cow that's sick, you know, you send it to the market because you can't give it any antibiotics, so, but I segued. Anyway, the European Union doesn't allow this either. And because they trade a lot with Africa, they are looking at the same type of regulations. They're called non-tariff barriers. They're looking at the same type of regulations out of Africa, in which closes our markets in Africa as well. So that trade agreement that we have going right now and negotiating with Kenya is very important to the US. There's other countries in Africa that are watching it, that perhaps would be interested in bilateral trade talks after it's complete with Kenya. We are also in the middle of trade agreements with China. We have phase 1 in China right now rolled out that I think a lot of people talked about yesterday. In Japan, we have a trade agreement with Japan and South Korea as well. So with the Trump administration, we had a lot of bilateral trade agreements going on at the same time. We weren't quite as global focused as we were with the Obama-Biden administration. What probably affects trade even more than tariffs and non-tariff barriers to trade is the value of our dollar. This affects us here right in the farmland, the value of the dollar, because our markets, we don't have control over our prices at all. They're set up on the commodity market, and that happens in Chicago, in Kansas, where there's people, large companies, and different speculators buy into the market, and it moves the market. It moves your prices up or down. And for us here in Nebraska on the farm, you know, we sell according to the market. Whatever the market is allowing at that time, we sell, and it constantly moves up and down, just like the stock market moves up and down. So the value of the dollar has a lot to do with trade and whether you are exporting or whether you are importing. Another big factor that affects trade is perception. So if there's a perception that we're having a problem with trade agreements, or that we have sanctions against a certain country, like we did with Cuba, which were removed with the Obama administration, then lately President Trump just initiated sanctions against Cuba again. These perceptions change our market too. So a lot of things that happen globally and in foreign policy affects all the way down to the family farm and what kind of price we get for our commodities and what we grow. We do tend to grow what the consumer demands. So if you are going to see a lot of changes, I think, as far as what the consumer demands and what farmers will grow in their fields or what they produce. Yesterday, there was a lot of talk about immigration that I noticed, and to me, immigration is, it's more of a domestic issue, really, a domestic policy. On the farm, what we see is visas. There's a real challenge with obtaining visas. We have a lot of harvest crews that come through. They tend to go around the globe depending upon the climate, and they come through and harvest crops. They start in Texas. For us, they start in Texas, they work all the way through Nebraska, and they work up into South and North Dakota during wheat harvest or during corn harvest. And a lot of those harvest crews are from South America, they're from South Africa, they're from Australia, they're from all over the world, and they have to obtain visas. And visa applications have become very difficult to obtain from other countries. So I think that's the bigger problem is our visa as far as getting in crews. We also hire in dry beans on our farm. We grew kidney beans and we grew pinto beans. And so, and also in the sugar beet fields, we hire crews to come in and take out the weeds. And they are probably, they're highly skilled, and most of them are from Mexico that come in. And it used to be where you had one crew member who is in charge of the entire crew, and you got their social security number, and you filled out an I-9, and you know, off you went. You paid that one person, they paid the rest of the crew. Well, now you really have to be a lot more thoughtful over who you're hiring in your field. And it's very difficult to put those crews together, and it's the only way you can get weeds out of those fields, because beans tend to be viney. Sugar beets are difficult to get through with the machinery. So you do need to hire the crews, and that has become a lot more difficult to do. There's also refugee populations, and we have a refugee populations here in Nebraska as well, but they don't usually work in agriculture. They don't always have that kind of a background. So a certain amount of refugees are allowed into our country. The president sets that level. They can set where they vet them, you know, if they have a degree or not. They can come into the country as an attorney, as a doctor, and work. But so that is also set, and in the Trump administration, that refugee population was very, very much reduced. But it doesn't affect us in the ag industry, but it does affect us in the manufacturing, in the meat packing, and all the other industries that tend to have fingers that fit the glove in the agricultural sector. As far as subsidies, you know, there's always a challenge with talking about subsidies, farm subsidies, with people who are not on the farm. The EU subsidizes, so does Canada, subsidizes their farmers, and through the Farm Bill, our farmers are subsidized too. Not all crops that are grown are subsidized. For instance, we grew, as I mentioned, kidney beans and pinto beans. Those are outside of the subsidies. You don't have subsidies for those kind of crops. Those kind of crops are not on the commodity market. So it's basically what the processors will pay you for those crops. The other crops, say corn is subsidized, but they're only subsidized to the point where the market price drops below. So if there's trade disputes and the perception is that nobody wants the corn and there's a surplus and it's sitting in mountains, you know, at the co-ops, the government will come in and subsidize those prices because they've fallen below the market. And by that I mean, if it costs you $5 a bushel to grow that corn, that's your input cost, but you're only getting $4.25 for that bushel, the farmer will be subsidized the difference. this helps us farmers go to the bank. Every year you go to the bank with your balance sheet, and if they see that you're losing money and you don't have a cash flow, guess what? You're out of farming because you won't get your loans. Farmers get paid once a year when we harvest our crops. That's when we get paid. Up until that point, we operate on operating loans. So if you can't get an operating loan because your market prices are below your input cost, you really struggle as a farmer. You struggle to put food on your table yourself. So those subsidies are not, so they're not, some think of them as welfare type, payments, but they're really not. They're really not to the farmer. In all reality, most of them would rather not have subsidies at all and let the market set the price. But the market's not always kind. So I think that I've talked a lot. If there's some questions, one more point I'll make before I stop. Every state, and including the state of Nebraska, we are involved in foreign relations. We are involved in foreign policy. We do participate in trade missions where we go into other countries and we meet ambassadors with the U.S. embassies. We meet prime ministers. We meet general consuls. We do make those kind of stops because we build relations with those countries between the state of Nebraska and with that particular country. I've been in a lot of countries. I've met a lot of ambassadors within those countries and the embassies, and I've met prime ministers. And in my position, it allows me to go in and do that. We establish relationships. We establish trust. If there's a challenge, with customs at the port, they're good to know. So that's probably where we are most hitting the ground as far as foreign policy and what we do as a state to benefit the state that we live in. So if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer those.
Thank you very much, Cindy. I guess, could you just start, most people in the United States, they think a state's Secretary of State, they think of elections, and obviously your election in one state in particular is very much in the viewpoint. Can you talk on a foreign policy, and you alluded to it generally, but what specifically does the Nebraska Secretary of State's office do with regard to at the national level? And you mentioned interacting with the U.S. trade rep, but when it comes to foreign policy, what does your office do, and is it significantly different from nearby states?
As far as elections, or we have a lot of people that come in and watch our elections from other countries. We just had a group come in from, some of them from the EU, a couple of them were from Russia, some were from Georgia, the country, and they do come in and they watch our elections. They go into the election offices, they talk with the poll workers, they watch how we conduct our elections. So we do have every election year, we do have groups from other countries come in. We also, in the Secretary of State's office, we also entertain pre-COVID. We also entertain groups that come in from universities, and we meet with them and talk about Nebraska, establish relationships with them, from different groups that come in that are sponsored by the state, through the State Department. We meet with them in the Secretary of State's office. So we have a lot of contact around the globe with different people who come in into the Secretary of State's office. I would say we probably entertain maybe 100 different groups that come in a month. And we meet in the Secretary of State's office and talk with them about politics, elections, agriculture. A lot of them go on to actually secure very prominent positions within their country too.
Thank you. So you mentioned the USMCA agreements. Can you talk about how your office manages those various equities, from the state? You're talking about you're in the side room when the U.S. Trade Representatives team is talking to Canada and Mexico, and they come and ask the state reps what they think about X, Y, or Z issue. Can you talk about how you manage those equities and where you get your information from to best represent the state?
I'll give you an example. There are actually two examples. One example was that in the USMCA, Canada wanted to change the way foreign aid with food aid is delivered. They wanted to remove all in-kind food aid donations from the United States in that agreement. And what's important about this is that we often have a surplus, and it's called number two. And number two, you can either sell it for food grade to cattle or livestock, or you can sell it for food aid. Number two, there's nothing wrong with it. It's just the wrong, different various sizes or different colors, or something that our consumers won't eat. We can sell it into food aid as far as in-kind food aid. Canada wanted to change that to cash or cash vouchers only. And we were against that because we have a surplus and we have number two products that work well with the food aid. Another big challenge was with the processors was the sanitary and phytosanitary rulings. They weren't always science-based. Sanitary is human and livestock consumption. Phytosanitary is plant. So they weren't always scientific based. I'll give you an example of that. A lot of rotations in the field is corn, soybeans, because they benefit each other as far as what they contribute to the soil. And when you harvest the corn, it's very difficult to not get a soybean in your corn. And the sanitary and phytosanitary ruling did allow for that because soybeans for some people are allergens. So if there was one soybean in a 1,000 metric ton container, that container was sent back and or dumped, and they didn't get paid. So we changed some of those sanitary and phytosanitary parts in the USMCA to allow for a certain residual amount in the port. Another challenge was that a lot of product would sit in the port for longer than 10 days, and with moisture, then toxins would grow in the product because it was heat, it was moisture, it was raining, it was all those things, especially in Mexico. And microtoxins would grow because it sat there for a month. So another thing that we were involved in changing was that they have to move that out of the port within a 10-day period.
Okay, we have one question. In regards to foreign trade missions that the governor of Nebraska meets every year, can you highlight some of the important trade deals or business won that is secured to them for Nebraska specifically? I guess generally, how does the Secretary of State's office interact with foreign states, and what are the focuses of those missions?
We went to, last year we went to Vietnam, and Vietnam is building more and more ports because a lot of Chinese exports go through Vietnam and sent back out, so they're not really from China, so they kind of avoid tariffs. But there's also, Vietnam had also changed some of their trade laws, and for us to trade into Vietnam, there were a lot of non-tariff barriers where we were not able to ship our beef to Vietnam. And they wanted our beef, but it was sitting in a queue, to be reviewed. So we weren't able to get it out of the queue before we went there on a trade mission, the governor's trade mission. And as a result of that trade mission, beef was brought out of the queue. We resolved our differences, and now we're shipping Nebraska beef into Vietnam. Another one was Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan bought soybeans, but they didn't buy soybeans from Nebraska. They bought soybeans out of Iowa. So since going there, we have talked with importers, and now they are buying soybeans out of Nebraska too. So in those trade missions, often those relationships that are formed allow you to benefit the state that you're representing as far as your goods and services.
Jay Rempe and the Cattlemen's representative yesterday both talked about the WTO. Can you talk about some either utility you've seen at the state level from WTO or any shortfalls as far as process with WTO adjudication over the last decade or so?
WTO is kind of interesting. You know, for a while, it didn't look like it was going anywhere. It was under the Bush administration and it just couldn't get legs. And then suddenly they found their sweet spot, and they really regulate all the countries that belong to the WTO. They regulate it in probably the biggest thing right now that they're handling is dispute settlement. The Boeing Airbus dispute settlement with the EU, and the steel aluminum dispute settlement with China and, well, other countries too. You know, we're able to submit claims to the WTO and show monetary losses, and they look at those claims and they issue a judgment, and in that judgment they issue a dollar amount that you lost, which also impacts Nebraska. And then with that dollar amount that you lost, you're able to set up retaliatory tariffs according to the dollar amount. You know, if it's $1 million, $1 billion, you can look at all your tariffs and all your products that are exported into that country and determine if you're going to add a tariff onto that product. So, you know, with Nebraska, agriculture gets hit the most because we're an agriculture state. So with that, you know, for instance, with the EU Airbus Boeing dispute, they just slapped a lot of tariffs onto agriculture products, dairy products especially, and beef and, you know, pork and chicken and all those things, corn, all those things are here in Nebraska that they put retaliatory tariffs on. So we are actually still working through that, but what happens is that our prices aren't even competitive with those tariffs, and we feel that here in Nebraska with especially, you know, I'm familiar with the dry bean industry. We're not able to. We went to Bulgaria because they consume dry beans and they only grow 10% of what they consume, so they import everything. And they were importing dry beans from Africa or Canada, and we wanted to sell them out of Nebraska. Well, with that tariff, because of the WTO dispute and claims, we were not able to be price competitive at all. And Bulgaria is part of the EU. So it does impact us. The WTO does impact us as far as how they handle those claims. Also, every country that's in the WTO is a favored nation. So they have, every country has an ability to get that favored nation status as far as the tariffs and as far as exporting into those countries and your rate quotas. So the WTO in that way impacts our state, mainly because of those trade disputes.
Yeah, it's funny. Most people, the big in the 1990s with China, as far as the most favored nation status. In reality, this means normal trade.
It does.
Confused. Can you speaking of China? Can you talk how Chinese retaliatory tariffs on agricultural products has reshaped the Nebraska export market, specifically for like soybeans, for example?
I think now in the phase one with China, they have been importing corn, soybeans, and beef and pork from the U.S. For a while, we had, you know, they weren't importing any at all, and we had a surplus of soybeans and corn. I mean, we were dumping corn on the ground. You can see it if you drive into one of the rural communities. You know, just mounds and mounds of corn, you know, sitting on the ground. Well, now it's all starting to move. And I just think that some of those, you know, retaliatory tariff lists that are put out by each country, by our country, their country, you know, as they agree to something, then suddenly, you know, they exclude that product from the list. We were hurt a bit in manufacturing in Nebraska because there's a lot of parts that came from China and only China. So the manufacturing sector was hit pretty hard in those disputes with China as well. And granted, you know, China has not always been a good actor, but, you know, I've been to Beijing, and when you're talking about working with people, you know, you try to kind of get above the politics a little bit and understand how to work in that country. And it's our fault that we think that everyone thinks like we do sometimes. And so they're tough negotiators. And the Trump administration and Ambassador Lighthizer, they were tough negotiators too. So they use those lists, and that's what affects us in China. But I think China's moving forward. I don't know, you know, they've agreed to a 2-year agreement, and they're starting to own up to that. We'll see what comes out of China next.
So can you talk about at the individual farmer or rancher level, how those policy machinations affect them? I mean, or does it not concern, does trade policy writ large not concern the individual farmer? They just see it through a middleman, or are they directly concerned with what China's going to pay for X, Y, or Z product, or is that handled at the middleman level? I guess the question is, what are the structural frictions that we see from these policy changes?
I think that, you know, because our prices are dependent upon the commodity market, you know, now I think it's all electronic, but it used to be, you know, you could go down there and watch them on the floor, and the brokers, and there would be buyers and speculators. You know, that's where it hits you on the farm, is that any of the trade disputes or trade agreements or exclusion off of retaliatory trade lists or tariffs, you know, you keep an eye on that, because it affects you as far as your cash flow. It affects you in your profit and loss, you know, on a daily basis. So you do watch trade. You may not understand all of it, but you do see the results in the market. You see the results of a higher dollar value. You see the results of different perceptions, you know, in the market. I think that as far as the dollar as the world reserve currency keeps us strong, you know, as an economy. But a lot of times a weak dollar really helps, you know, really helps us in the agriculture business, because then we can export a lot more, where a stronger dollar does not. But I guess I diverse, but you know, where we watch trade is in the markets, in the commodity markets, and how that price ends up every day. I'll give you an example of price. Say the commodity market decides that they're going to buy corn for $5.10 a bushel, but the co-ops don't have any sellers. So you're sitting there with your corn, you're paying a storage fee with your corn, and they don't have any sellers. So what they do is they increase the basis. The basis is the difference between the market and what they'll pay you. They determine that on transportation, or if they really want it. So if they really want that bushel of corn, they'll charge 20 cents a bushel basis. So you're not getting $5.10 like the commodity market showed. You're getting $40.90. Well, if they don't want the corn, they'll charge $1 basis, and you might have to sell, you know, because you get paid once a year. You have to support your family and pay for your house and your food and your groceries and all that. So you're gonna sell it for $1 a basis, you know. So you're $1 below the market, and as that market fluctuates depending upon trade perceptions, you decide when to sell and when to hold. Sometimes you don't have a choice because the bank is on your back, but that's how you're affected by trade. That's how you're affected by foreign policy. right down to the grassroots level.
Can you talk about some coordination efforts, both good and bad, between the state level and the national level, between you and the FTC or the U.S. trade rep? I mean, how do those equities get represented from the state? Is it mostly your office? Is it mostly the Dry Bean Council, the Chamber of Commerce, or how does that interaction take place from your perspective?
Well, every state has different type of councils and commissions. You spoke with the Corn Board yesterday, and cattlemen, they all have national organizations that they belong to. And those national organizations can write letters, they can talk with your congressman, they can talk with people that they might know at USTR. For me, because I'm on the AgPAC committee, the Ag Policy Advisory Committee, it's direct. We sit down with Ambassador Lighthizer, and I tell him what's going on in Nebraska and the impact of what is happening in trade as far as how it impacts us. And we also sit down with the Secretary of Agriculture. I did sit down with Tom Vilsack, and Sonny Perdue is there at the table. So we have representation in that way. They also ask for public comment, and not many people really know that. We get phone calls once a month updating us, asking us, the trade negotiators, there's a lot of trade negotiators that are specialized in different fields. Some are, financial services, and some are pharmaceuticals, some are medical devices, some are agriculture, but it's not all the same. Dairy is different than beef. So we would get phone calls once a month from the trade negotiators who are talking with the other countries, say the UK. They're going to table a certain chapter of the trade agreement, and this is what they're going to table, this is what they're going to negotiate, how does that impact you? So we do have a direct line in that way as far as what happens in the world and how it impacts us in our own state.
Sorry, my mic wasn't working. So you mentioned visas and issues. So you're primarily talking the frustration at the farmer rancher level is with the ability to get temporary or permanent visas, and what specific kind?
A lot of now, it used to be where, say we had a crew come in from Poland. I'll give an example. So in Poland, they would, to work here, if you weren't a student, if you're a student, it's a little bit easier to get a visa. But if you're not a student, you're coming here to work, you would go to the embassy and stand out in front and see if they called your name, because you had your application for a visa in, and they would call your name, and then you'd stand there for hours waiting to hear your name. And then once they call your name, then you're given an appointment to go back and you're interviewed, and they say yay or nay. And so some people are, rejected. Some people are accepted, and they get their visas. Now there's companies that do this for you. Companies vet and recruit people, and they send them over. So the money that those visa applicants get goes back to the company, because the company is paying for their visa, they arrange for their visa, and they paid for their expenses, their travel expenses, that type of thing. So it's a while before they actually get money back into their own pockets without paying the company. So the companies have really capitalized on the challenge of getting visas and profiting off of that, rather than just having people stand in front of an embassy and hopefully they get past the second interview and get their visa. But it is a long process. It's a very long process. And by that time, if they can't come, then you're stuck. You don't have your laborers for that summer. And there's a lot of farmers in the West that do hire foreign labor for the summer because they are skilled. You can't just take a high school kid and put him in the field because he doesn't know what he's doing. He's going to chop out half your crop and think that they're all weeds. These are skilled people, and that's who we hire on the farm. You can't spend your time trying to, train someone who's home for college and then they go back to college. Unless they've been on the farm, they don't have that skill set.
So how many temporary laborers do you need in a typical Nebraska summer? An estimate.
Yeah, overall, our crews usually were probably 20 just on our farm. Mm-hmm. And, so you're looking over everything in Nebraska. So it's hundreds and hundreds of laborers that come in on the farm in the summer.
And has the frustration been the amount of temporary visas or just the processing time that has
processing time? The processing time. Yeah, I think that if they can process them quicker and issue visas, that would be great. I understand the need to vet. You don't want to have challenges the other way, of course, but the processing time is what really hangs them up because they're coming here to work. And, you can't find seasonal workers.
Yeah.
People want a full-time job. They don't want a job for 3 months.
Yeah. Are there any infrastructure holdups in the state that have infrastructure is a big topic of late in terms of a federal stimulus package. It's been a topic for several years. The American Council of Civil Engineers gives American infrastructure either a C+ or a D-, depending on which report you read. But writ large, do producers in Nebraska have trouble getting their product to market, both internal and specifically to ports for shipment?
No, I think that we have a pretty good infrastructure with Interstate 80 that goes from coast to coast, going straight through Nebraska. We have waterways. We can ship down to the Gulf. We also ship out to California. When there was a dock strike out in California, that really hurt us because everything sat. But as far as the infrastructure itself, I think that's one of the best kept secrets in Nebraska is that we do have a tremendous infrastructure here as far as moving product.
One guest has a question. Are there any state-sponsored international exchange programs in Nebraska? I guess specifically for universities or for industry?
Yes. Well, state-sponsored, you know what? I don't know how to answer that. We do have people come in. I'm in Rotary, so we, of course, have hosted many exchange students in our home through Rotary. But state-sponsored, I don't think I can answer that for you as far as who they are, but I know that they are there because we meet with them in our office. So somebody would have to do a little more research than I can give you right now.
All right, last question, and it's more of a personal one. With regard to American foreign policy, what would you say the typical Nebraskan sees as needed priorities for the country?
The typical Nebraskan is needed priorities for the country. I don't know how to answer that question. There's a difference in the philosophical outlook between whether we should be more global or whether we should be more protectionistic in our country. More global. When we were more global under the Obama administration, there was a lot of talk about the dollar no longer being the world reserve currency, which would really hurt us. Where they were talking about maybe a basket of currencies like the EU, the euro, the yen, and the dollar together in one basket. When Trump administration came in, that globalization kind of went to the wayside. We were far more targeted, probably more protectionistic, in the outlook. I don't know which is better for the state of Nebraska. It so much depends upon the administration and how they see how the U.S. relates to the rest of the world. The power of our military, of course, and John, you know that. whether we're big actors in NATO or whether we're going to call upon our allies to ante up, because we were really strong in NATO, wondering if NATO should continue. So as far as foreign policy and global, I think that most of the people in Nebraska will support their government. And one thing about Nebraskans, we're like a can-do state and we adjust.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Cindy. It's been a pleasure. Did you have any closing comments or anything you want to leave us with?
No, it was I hope that I benefited somebody with what I wanted to share, and I just didn't do a big old dump of information that you probably already knew. So I thank you for this opportunity. I'm really privileged to be here, and again, I hope that it was beneficial.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
All righty, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Sir, good morning. Try that one time. There we go.
How do you hear? You guys hear and see me okay?
Loud and clear. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, well, appreciate it.
All right. Our second guest today is Rear Admiral William Wheeler. He serves as the U.S. Strategic Command Chief of Staff. A native of Cross City, Florida, Admiral Wheeler is a Naval Academy graduate and career flight officer. He's held numerous operational assignments across the globe, including a member of a provincial reconstruction team in Patika Province, Afghanistan, and commander of a patrol and reconnaissance wing in Jacksonville, Florida. As a STRATCOM Chief of Staff, Admiral Wheeler coordinates the activities of one of the 11 unified commands. U.S. STRATCOM is responsible for the global command and control of U.S. strategic forces, which means nuclear weapons, to meet decisive national security objectives, providing a broad range of strategic capabilities and options to the President and Secretary of Defense. Sir, thank you for joining us this morning.
No, appreciate it very much, and it's good to be here with you. You guys are kind of an experiment for us. So this is really the first time we've tried to do an unclassified sort of Zoom presentation from inside the headquarters itself. So hopefully it'll all work out, and but looking forward to it. What I thought I'd do is just start out and give you a few minutes just to sort of frame some of the discussion that hopefully we can have. I'll tell you, I'll start out by saying I am a little intimidated, speaking to a class of folks that are working on their PhD. I'm just a little country boy from North Florida, so hopefully I can hold my own. But I do appreciate what you are doing, to improve yourself, and that's something that we and all the services really stress. That sort of the continuous learning process that we all go through. But I'm happy to join you today. So as mentioned, I am the Chief of Staff of U.S. Strategic Command, and what that really means is I'm sort of the head cat herder around here. I am the guy that the commander looks to keep the staff moving, keep the processes moving, and aligned, to our mission. We are one of 11 combatant commands. So the Department of Defense has divided up the responsibility around the globe to those 11 four-star commanders, and we are one of those. One of 5 that really have a global perspective. And when I say global, it's literally around the world, looking at all the things that are happening around the world, and making sure that we are in a position to deter those activities. The enterprise for U.S. Strategic Command is 150,000 folks, soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, guardians, and civilians located around the world doing the mission 24/7, 365. Our headquarters here at Offutt Air Force Base in Nebraska is about 2,600 people. And again, all services, as well as a pretty significant civilian contingent. Offutt itself, the Air Force Base proper, about 8,000 military, another 4,000 civilians, and then around the local community, if you start factoring in dependents, retirees, and so on and so forth, you get up to around almost 40,000 folks. So it's a pretty significant impact for the local community. I think, a number I saw was 2.3 billion in total economic impact. So again, that's, we think that's pretty significant for the Omaha area. U.S. Strategic Command itself is responsible for, the Department of Defense's highest priority mission, which is strategic deterrence. I will note that when we use the word strategic deterrence, it is not synonymous. It does not mean the same as nuclear deterrence. And we can go into that a little bit if you'd like. But we do believe that the mission that we perform does set the foundation for the other Department of Defense missions that exist. So, they are all the plans that are out there. Everything that we do in the military, assumes that strategic deterrence holds. If strategic deterrence does not hold, then we're in a different place. So again, we can explore that if you'd like. U.S. Strategic Command traces our history back to Strategic Air Command. That entity was built post World War II to really look at the Air Force side of the nuclear force, and then since then, obviously, we've pulled in the Navy and established a combatant command to manage that. The modern headquarters and our modern mission really stood up in 2002. And then since then, we've actually spun off a couple of other combatant commands. So U.S. Cyber Command and U.S. Space Command. So at one point, those mission sets belonged to us here at STRATCOM. But obviously, those have since moved on to other places. Our mission is set by the president in something called the Unified Command Plan. So that really delineates those missions for us. So it's strategic deterrence, nuclear operations, joint electromagnetic spectrum operations, global strike, missile defense, analysis and targeting, and then another one that that the Admiral, the 4-star here, has under his hat, not under his strategic command hat, but a separate one is nuclear command control and communications enterprise lead. So that's a big fancy way of saying we got a lot of stuff on our plate. We got a lot of missions outside of just nuclear operations. Our priorities: provide strategic deterrence, and if deterrence fails, deliver a decisive response, and maintain a combat-ready force. So those are the three kind of bullets that I would give you as our priorities. Another thing we could explore, if you like, is there's been some discussion in the news lately about the Triad, the nuclear Triad. So when we say nuclear Triad, we're talking about the three critical pieces: intercontinental ballistic missiles, ICBMs, submarine launched ballistic missiles off of our SSBN, our big nuclear powered submarines, and bombers. So those are primarily B-52s, B-1s, B-2s, those type of forces. The Triad itself, those three legs are aging out. We're talking 50s, 60s, 70s technology that are that we've been able to keep them up, keep them flying, keep them sailing, keep them proficient, but they are getting significantly old and aging out, and they are going to require replacement. So and that's obviously not going to be cheap. So we're working our way through that and trying to advocate on behalf of the department to make sure we're able to do that and maintain our strategic deterrence focus. Omaha, just a couple of nuggets. I have never been stationed here. I've been here now about 6 months, and I can tell you when they told a Navy guy, they're like, "Hey, we want you to go to the middle of the country." I went, "What? You want me to go where?" Right smack dab in the middle of the nation. But it is absolutely beautiful out here. It's gorgeous. Even in the blizzard that we're experiencing right now, it's a great place to live. My wife and I, when we drove out, we came through the little town of Bellevue, which is where the headquarters is stationed, just outside of Bellevue, which is just south of Omaha. And I remember driving down the road, and there were American flags hanging on every pole. And I looked at my wife and I said, we're going to be okay. This is going to be a nice place to live. And sure enough, the folks out here are phenomenal. We got good public schools. We have something called the Stratcom Consultation Committee, which is pretty unique. It's made up of local leaders. We have a great working relationship with those local leaders. And again, it's just a good place to live. World-class zoo, museums. Again, just a great part of America, and it's unique for a Navy guy to be here. So let me stop there. I think I've been running here for a few minutes, and just open it up to questions or thoughts or comments, and we'll just see where it takes us.
Okay, sir. Thank you very much. The first question is, what is the most common confusion about U.S. Stratcom, both in terms of mission and just what it is and does?
Well, I think, when people think strategic command, the first thing that comes to their mind is, well, that's those nuclear guys. He's the nuke boss. And yes, that is true. But as I tried to mention there, it's much broader. And I think, where we spend the majority of our time, quite frankly, is trying to think through a lot of the what ifs. As I mentioned, because we do have that global perspective, or we certainly try to maintain a global perspective. It puts us in a unique position to try to think through some of those things. Hey, what the event that was in the news a few weeks ago, solar winds. The cyber intrusions into the supply system that resulted in some shenanigans there in some of our systems. What does that mean for the nation? How should we be thinking about this? Is it an existential threat? Again, nothing in there nuclear, but it has the potential to be a strategic problem for the nation. So I think that's one of the things that most folks don't think about when they think about U.S. Strategic Command, but we spend a lot of time and energy trying to work our way through those type of problems. Over.
I think it's going to be an emerging debate is how cyber develops as a framework as it relates both to just to law enforcement and into warfare writ large. Like, at what point does a cyber incident become an attack, and what time does an attack hit a threshold? We haven't figured that out yet, clearly. Yeah, no,
I completely agree. And, I guess one of the advantages or disadvantages, I don't know of, for me was before I came here, I was the planning director at U.S. Cybercom. So I did get a little peek under the tent under some of those activities. And it's the same type of questions, you work through what is an attack? What is espionage? What does normal look like? What is the standard? How do you set the global standard for what is acceptable in the cyber realm? It's a hard problem to work your way through.
Sure. So Omaha recently lost the bidding / competition for U.S. Space Force. What do you think the future of Offutt Air Force Base is in Omaha? Obviously, the base isn't going anywhere. We've built your $1 billion headquarters, but it's drastically reduced from what its heyday 20 years ago or 30 years ago when I was growing up here. What do you think the future of that base looks like? And just as far as military installations in the Midwest, it's one of the few remaining. Offutt is. Forbes Field, Topeka shut down. Salina, Kansas. The Air National Guard base there is now just a civilian airport, et cetera, et cetera. What do you think the future of Offutt looks like as one of the remaining installations in the Midwest?
Yeah, well, I tell you, I think Offutt's on solid ground. The department is getting ready to invest a significant amount of money into some of the repairs that are required based on the flood that we had a couple of years ago. But the men and women that live here, that work here, absolutely love it. We have a very, very high rate of hiring here at the Strategic Command. I think it's up in the 90+ percentage points of when we have an opening, we can get folks hired. People want to stay here. They want to live here. They want to remain here. So I think Offutt itself is it's a diamond for the department, and I certainly don't see it going away anytime soon. I think the other thing that we have we have a tremendous relationship with the local community. I mentioned that thing called the Stratcom consultation committee. That's pretty significant. That's something that I have never seen anywhere else. There may be others, but I just don't know of them. But the relationship that we have with the community is phenomenal. And I have had the opportunity to go to travel to some of the other bases with some of those members, and they are just tremendous people, looking for ways to help Stratcom, to help Offutt, to improve quality of life. They are just again tremendous folks and tremendous support here in the community. So I think we're on solid ground here at Offutt. And I think the other thing that's pretty interesting is those the people that are on that committee they keep their ears open, and they are always looking for opportunities. There was an organization, and don't quote me on this one because I'm pulling in some electrons from a ways back, but there was an organization that's responsible for POW, MIA activities. The finding the remains of our soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines that were lost, and trying to get them their remains, back into the States. That organization at one point in time was kind of looking for a home, and the folks of Omaha jumped in and said, "Hey, we would love to have you and support you here at Offutt." And I believe they were successful in pulling that organization into Offutt, and it's now a part of this base. So again, I think it's unique in that they are engaged. So I think we're pretty solid.
So you mentioned the Offutt local community council. What do you see as challenges relating American? Because you're involved at the national grand strategic level. How do you relate those concerns or what America's doing big picture as you interact with the local community, and what challenges have you found in those interactions?
Well, obviously, we are, we keep our eyes on the horizon, and we are certainly aware of all the activities that are going on around the nation, and some of those challenges. The folks here in Omaha, and my relationships with them, extremely educated, very in tune to what's going on, very open to having those discussions and making sure that everyone's aware of what's going on, and they're intriguing. They'll ask questions, and so again, we do have those engagements, but again, I think the relationship is very, very good, very, very solid, and don't see any challenges associated with that at all.
A question from a student. On the unclassified level, what does the nuclear triad modernization plan look like in the future? We're trying to spend something, and I've seen various news reports, like $1 trillion over the next decade-ish. Is it a modernization program? Is it a capabilities improvement, or is it just maintaining what we have in terms of the three legs of the triad?
Yeah, so I think each part of the triad is a little different. I'll quickly get out of my level of expertise on this, so I'll try to make sure I'm accurate and careful. But B-52s, for example, I mean, these are airplanes that we've been flying since the 60s. They are older than I am, and that is ancient. The plan is to really, those aircraft are going to go through some upgrades, get some improvements to their engines, get some improvements to their avionics, to try to keep them flying as long as we can possibly keep them flying. The the submarines, they're to the point where we just need a new submarine, and that's the Columbia class SSBN. So that will be a new platform, and obviously it will certainly come with upgrades and increase the capability of that particular platform. It's just part of the natural upgrading process. When you upgrade something, it's going to be better. And really the ICBMs are in a similar profile. It's not that we're going to make tremendous leaps and bounds in our sort of tactical ability, if you will, but just by virtue of upgrading to the most current technology, you are going to get an increase in performance there. An interesting thing on the ICBMs that I've run across here recently is, when the 4-star talks about the upgrades to the intercontinental ballistic missiles, he says, hey, we're dealing with systems that were designed, back in the 50s and 60s. Many of those designs, the plans themselves, we don't even have. We can't find them. And the folks that built it and designed it are not even alive. So it's hard to continue to upgrade systems like that. You just can't patch them together anymore. And at some point, it just becomes too fiscally challenging, to try to do that. And you're much better off just all right, let's just replace those parts. So I think that's kind of where we are really, as we've extended so much that we're just at the point where you can't extend it anymore. And it is going to, force the department and the nation to make some hard choices. And we absolutely realize that. And again, that's not our decision here at Stratcom. All we can do is, hey, here's the information, to be accurate, to be truthful, to lay it out for the department and the nation, and then let our civilian leaders make those decisions, and then we salute and execute the decision that's made.
In terms of, if you had to brief the Secretary of State on what Stratcom does before, let's say, a G7 meeting, it's kind of speculative, but what would you say are the tools or background tools that Stratcom provides to the Secretary as he goes in to meet with both partners and adversaries?
So I would say, Mr. Secretary, you can rest assured that U.S. Strategic Command is poised, positioned, trained, and ready to execute the nuclear deterrent mission, as described and as ordered, by the president. I tell you, and I've been on a lot of places, obviously in my career. There's no other place that I've been that trains at a headquarters level as much and as hard as they do here at U.S. Strategic Command. I think over the course of the last, I want to say 14, maybe up to 18 months, they've been over 430 exercises executed here at Stratcom to make sure that our procedures are solid, our people are trained, and when ordered, we are in a position to execute the mission. So that's really what I would want to leave him with is, sir, you can depend on U.S. Stratcom to be able to execute our mission when and if called.
That's interesting because, as you're aware, most combatant commands have no operational role. You're one of the few that actually literally commands and controls forces rather than apportioning them.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. When we don't look to anybody else to do it. It's done here at the headquarters. And I'll give you a little quick sea story if you don't mind. So I think I was here about 3 days in the chief of staff job, and this was my turnover. I walked in. I think I came in on a Friday, and the guy that I was turning over with, he goes, "Hey, here's your desk. You got some briefs set up. If you need something, let me know. I'm leaving in 4 hours."
Perfect handover.
Yeah, it's like, great, that's awesome. As a Friday afternoon, I was the chief of staff. So I'm like, oh my goodness, what have I got myself into? So I survived through the weekend. I show up on Monday morning. I'm able to find my desk, and I get there. I sit down. I start going through the daily briefings and my email and those kind of things. All of a sudden, this red light, and the commander is not here. He is at home. He was working from home that day. Part of our COVID mitigation and all that stuff. We try to keep all of ourselves separated. So he was working from home that day, and I come in and sit. Like I said, I sit down. I start working. A few minutes later, red lights start flashing. There's phones start ringing. I'm like, oh my goodness, what is going on? And it's a drill. So they come and they grab me. They run me down into the command center. I'm sitting there trying to figure out what's going on. And a few minutes later, the commander comes rolling in. He's sweating. He's all a little bit disheveled. Don't tell him that. A little bit disheveled. He's trying to, and sure enough, the staff had put on a no notice, exercise. When the call went out, the commander was grabbing uniform items, throwing them on, and he was getting dressed in his car on the way here. And he was fully engaged and fully participating in that exercise. He had no idea it was going to happen, nor did any of the leadership here at the headquarters. So that's the kind of commitment. That's the kind of exercise training that goes on. And since then we've done several of those. And again, it's just fascinating to watch when you have 2 stars, 3 stars, 4 stars, fully engaged, fully participating in every exercise that exists. So it's a neat place to be. It's a great place to work. Over.
Yeah, that's really interesting, especially at a combatant command. So on that note, a question from a student: what adjustments has your office made, or has Stratcom made due to COVID? I can work from home. People on Nipper can work from home, but SIPR and JWICS don't exactly have landlines run to your house. How has the Stratcom mitigated that, specifically with reference to classified information?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and it has been a challenge. But with any challenge comes a great opportunity. So I think what the pandemic has done, not only for U.S. Stratcom, but for the other combatant commands that really live and breathe on on classified information and classified networks, it's forced us to come up with solutions. And we have come up with solutions to do much of that work, and from alternate locations, on a classified environment, and we've also used it a lot to reduce some of the bureaucratic processes that are in place. I think that's been a big opportunity for us. Does that really belong in a classified network? First of all, can I do that another way? And if the answer is, hey, it's got to be classified, then you go, okay, well, do I really need to do it at all? Does it matter? Can I just stop doing that? So it's given us opportunity to go after some of those type of problems. One of the advantages of Stratcom too, there's most of the leadership at Stratcom. We live right here on Offutt Air Force Base. So we are, my house is about a 5-iron away. It's not far. And, if I really have to get to work to a top secret enclave, I can do that fairly quickly. But yeah, it's given us some opportunities. We've done a lot of stuff in the telework environment. Again, I think that's been pretty common across the department to move in that direction.
Thank you, sir. All right, next, from a local businessman. North Korea has been relatively quiet with regard to missile launch and public posturing, at least. Can you give us a brief unclass overview of where missile defense stands and monitoring stands from your perspective, sir? Yeah,
so there's they are an organization that is falls under the U.S. Stratcom, Joint Force, JFCC, IMD, and their mission is, or their purpose is missile defense. And I can tell you, again, during this pandemic, they have not missed a beat. We have had soldiers, on call, at the terminal, doing what they do, again, 24/7, 365. They have a motto out there. It's the 300 protecting the 300 million, which is pretty neat. It's 300 soldiers made up of both active duty and various National Guard units that execute that mission, and they're there watching. Again, like I said, 24/7, 365, protecting the nation. So I think we're in a good place. Obviously, it's something we always have to keep watching. There's a lot of rhetoric coming out of North Korea right now. I think they just finished up, their latest talks there in Pyongyang. So we're to see what comes out of that. But definitely increasing the rhetoric, and it is something we're watching. Over.
So, the Obama administration made a so-called pivot to the Pacific, and it was largely endorsed in the 2017 National Security Strategy, or at least continued. Some of the language changed, but a long story short, a focus on China and the Indo-Pacific. What adjustments to force power and force development has Stratcom made towards that end, towards the Pacific?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I think the biggest thing that has driven us to do is and we've come to the realization that for the first time in our nation's history, we have two peer or near peer competitors, in the strategic realm, nuclear in particular. During the Cold War, it was the Soviet Union, right? We were focused on the Soviet Union. Now, you got you got Russia and China that both possess a significant nuclear arsenal, and they both must be deterred differently. And that has really driven us to look hard at our strategy, our plans, how we approach those two problems, and one is really not a subset of the other. They are different. They think differently. They approach things differently. So I think that's the biggest shift is as you watch the buildup of the nuclear forces in China, it does cause you to pause and really drive into, okay, what does this really mean for the nation? How do we approach this? Now I've got two peers in the nuclear realm, vice just one. So I think that's the biggest challenge and the biggest change. Over.
Can you talk Stratcom's integration with joint and allies and partners in the Indo-Pacific as far as planning and force deployment?
I think we. Again, we've got good relationships with many of those partners. We have some partners that have liaison officers with us here in the headquarters, and we have them really aligned with our plans folks. So the folks that look at that stuff every day in and day out. The commander himself has a good relationship with many of the leaders around the world, and specifically in the Pacific, that he communicates with quite frequently. So again, a lot of good work going on there, and again, good relationships, open communications, and I think it's something that we put as a priority both here at the headquarters and across the Department of Defense.
Have there been any requests for deployment of THAAD or similar systems to other countries besides South Korea, or is that even managed at the STRATCOM level?
Yeah, I probably am not in a good position to answer that one. Just don't know. Obviously, those type of systems are high demand, low density. And there's a lot of considerations that go into those decisions. But other than giving you sort of that generic answer, I'm just not in a position to answer that one. Sorry.
No problem, sir. From a student there was this trip is normally not virtual for one, but it's funded by the Carnegie Endowment for Peace, which is across the street from SAIS in DC. And last year's report, based on some public polling, I'm going to read the quote and then I'll ask you the question. From the Carnegie Endowment report, it appears Nebraskans' trust in foreign policy professionals and the public sector is generally eroding or decreasing. Does STRATCOM engage with the state or wider community outside of Omaha, i.e. the western part of the state and or in Iowa, that area?
Yeah, so obviously, with the pandemic going on, we've had to curtail quite a bit of those type of engagements here recently. And I haven't been here long enough to really give you a good answer on what historically we've done. I can tell you that part of that consultation committee brings in folks from outside of Omaha proper. I know there's some leaders from down in Lincoln that are part of that organization. There are some politicians that are part of those organizations. I do know we are trying to reach folks that are again not just part of Omaha proper, but can't give you much more on what we've done for the far western corner of Nebraska. Over.
So a common stat from that report, or a common thing as we relate to American foreign policy of the Heartland, is the cost, right? So DoD is roughly $750 billion a year. It's roughly the next 7 states, nation states combined in terms of military expenditure. That's not accurate in terms of a per capita budget, but that's a whole different discussion. I guess from a STRATCOM strategic messaging perspective, how do you explain that cost to a middle American who primarily sees foreign policy, as we've discussed in this forum and yesterday, in terms of all I want is open markets so I can sell my stuff and I don't want to get screwed on the open market? How do we relate that cost in terms of military budget, and specifically in terms of STRATCOM and nuclear weapons post-Cold War? It's going to be obsolete. It's obviously not. That's what your command exists to do, sir. How do you relate that cost to the average Heartland voter?
Yeah, it's interesting. I did as you kind of mentioned, I did a year on the ground there in Afghanistan, working in some very, very rural areas, and
very familiar Patika.
And Paktika, on the coast, or on the coast. There's my Navy kicking in, on the border there with Pakistan, just about every day we were out somewhere doing something with the community. And what you quickly realize is those folks, they were just trying to survive. They just wanted to be, left alone to farm their land, raise their family, and get through the winter. And I say that because that's something that I've never forgotten. And I think it's important to realize that a lot of folks, even in America, they look at it from hey, I just want to raise my family, farm my land, run my store, do my job, be successful, and provide for my family. So I think that's something we can never ever forget. When you start talking about big budgets like that, it can be overwhelming for folks. But I think what's important for us to continue to share with the people is, hey, you really can't afford not to do it. The motto here at STRATCOM is peace is our profession. That is what we want. That is what we strive for. No one wants peace more than the folks that are wearing a uniform. And so I think that's, making sure that we don't lose the perspective, making sure that we are being, honest, open, and sincere, with the folks that we engage with, that we talk to, and then again, let the decision makers make the decisions on where we go with that. But it's kind of one of those, you really can't afford not to, if you do want to keep those markets open, be successful, and support your families. Over.
With the expiration of SALT II and open skies, do you foresee, and from the Stratcom foresee, enhanced strategic weapons competition between the U.S., China, Russia? And what do you think of the implications of the expiration of SALT II and open skies are?
Yeah, well, I think, one of the in some of the recent negotiations, with the New START treaty, and some of the work that the administration was doing, specifically with the Russians to try to get that one resolved. When they came to Stratcom and asked if we would be willing to provide some support, the commander said, absolutely. Not only will I provide support, I will give you my deputy commander. So we provided a 3-star, the deputy commander, to that effort, to ensure that the folks that were involved with those negotiations, working those potential agreements, and had the most up-to-date information that we could provide. So, the bottom line of that little conversation really is, we absolutely want to support those type of agreements, and look forward to continuing those discussions. As soon as the new administration comes on board, I do anticipate that would be something that they will jump into right away and try to tackle. And again, any support that we can provide here from Stratcom, to make sure they have the most current information and understand the impacts and risk associated with those decisions is what we'll try to do.
Do you foresee expiration of those controls drastically affecting the Triad modernization you talked about earlier?
Well, I don't believe so. I think where the one of the challenges that we have with some of those negotiations is what is counted and what is not counted. And particularly, the Russians, there is a significant amount of what some people will call tactical nuclear weapons, or short range nuclear weapons, that are really not accounted for in some of those treaties and organizations. So that's quite frankly a concern, and something that we would want to ensure we properly address or bring to light. I think the other big part of it is, again, as I mentioned a little bit, that's really a bilateral approach, and now we have another player, in the field of nuclear weapons that is an existential threat to the United States. So how do we pull China into this discussion? I think is something to be considered, and again work through. So I think those are the two biggest concerns or thoughts that we would have as we work through that. Over.
Okay, sir, I know you have a meeting immediately following this. I'd like to thank you very much for your time and your perspective, and I'll turn it over to you if you have any closing comments.
Yeah. Hey, John, thanks again for having me. And again, I'll be the first to admit that, I know I didn't do justice to the topic, but hopefully I give you a little bit of perspective. Again, you got a Navy guy that's lived around the water his entire life, now picked up and put right in the middle of the nation, in Omaha, Nebraska. And, again, my impression of the area is very, very positive. Folks, a lot of folks come to Nebraska and they never leave. They come here, they live here, they retire here, and it's a good place to be and raise a family. I think the folks here are as you would find anywhere else. They're great Americans, very loyal, very patriotic, and it's just like I said, a great place to be stationed. Strategic Command itself, very, very professional organization. You folks can be assured that, in my opinion, you are absolutely getting your money's worth for the money that's been spent here at the headquarters at U.S. Strategic Command in Offutt Field. The folks here, they train like no other. They are professional, and they do their mission. So again, appreciate your time. Thanks for letting me address the class. Hopefully you got a little bit out of this, but again, I am by no means a polished presenter, but I do appreciate your time. So thank you so much. Thank you, sir. And
I'll second your notion of Omaha. I never thought I left here when I was 17. I never thought I'd end up back, and here I am. Thank you, sir. Appreciate your time. To the group, we're going to be on a 15-minute break, and the next panels will be Congressman Don Bacon from Nebraska's 2nd District. Thank you. All right. So, hi there. All right. Sir John Bolton, good to see you in person after a brief phone call. I'll give you your intro, and then I know your staff briefed you, but we're looking for 5 to 10 minutes of comments from you, and then a Q&A with students. Okay. All right. Our next guest is Congressman Don Bacon of Nebraska's 2nd Congressional District. He grew up on a farm in Illinois and joined the Air Force after earning a bachelor's degree in political science from Northern Illinois University. He served for nearly 30 years, retiring as a brigadier general. During his Air Force career, Congressman specialized in electronic warfare, intelligence, reconnaissance, and public affairs. A decorated aviator, and flew most of his career in the EC-130 Compass Call. His career included 2 assignments as a wing commander in Germany and Nebraska, group commander in Arizona, squadron commander in Arizona, and expeditionary squadron command in Iraq. Following his retirement in 2014, Congressman Bacon served as a military congressman general, who was assistant professor at Bellevue University in Nebraska. Congressman Bacon was elected to represent Nebraska's 2nd Congressional District in November of 2016. Notably, Congressman Bacon is the highest ranking veteran in Congress and represents one of the split electoral votes in Nebraska, along with which Nebraska, along with Maine, allocates its electoral votes by district. Sir, thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you, and I want to just call you ambassador. But anyway, it's a pleasure to be on. And I got to confess, I'm not the senior ranking veteran anymore. We have Lieutenant General Jack Bergman, who is he was in the Marines, active duty for a while, then he was in the Guard or Reserves. And we also have 2 Guard generals who just made Major General that are in there. Steve Stivers, I think he's a 2-star now, and Trent Kelly is a 2-star. Okay. So it's when I ran in 16, I thought I'd be the only general in the House, but now we have 5 total.
Wow, that's great.
It's a pleasure to be on with everybody, and I look forward to talking to you here for about 10, 15 minutes and taking questions. I got back from D.C. Yesterday, and of course, as you know, Wednesday we had the impeachment, and I'd be glad to talk about that if people want to in the Q&A. Last week we had the vote on certifying the ballots. And for the first time since 1814, our Capitol was overwhelmed. And one of the things I've always felt good about our country, we are the oldest, the most grandest republic in the world. We have so much to be proud of. And I do believe in what Thomas Jefferson said and Ronald Reagan, that we're this bright, shining city on a hill. I will tell you that day it dimmed our bright, shining city, at least for a while. When we talk about democracy and human dignity, liberty, free markets, those values resonate in the world. And we've shown how we do peaceful transition of power since really our first elections were 1788 under the Constitution. And I think what we've done, we've hurt ourselves and embarrassed ourselves for the short term anyway, and it's unacceptable. But we can come back to that. So what does foreign affairs and foreign policy what does it mean to Nebraskans? And so I think the first and foremost, you've probably heard this from other panelists, it's really number one for the average Nebraskan, I would say, is trade. We are an export state. We're one of the biggest export states there is. And it's because we are the number one of all 50 states when it comes to exporting beef. We actually export more beef than Texas. So if you got Texans in the audience, I'm sorry. Nebraska leads the way on that. We're also we're in the top 5 for corn, ethanol. We're also very high for soybeans and pork. So in sorghum, we've actually exported the entire supplies that we had of sorghum this year to China, right? And so when it comes down to it, trade is so important to the Nebraskan economy. 1 out of every 4 jobs is agriculture related. So if we can have a high export market, the entire economy of Nebraska is uplifted. Even if you're not directly involved with the agriculture industry, you're indirectly involved. I'll give you an example. We have the largest private bank in America right here in Omaha, the First National Bank. Its number 1 lending is to agriculture, businesses, and farmers. Just to put it in perspective. So it's not directly, but it's indirectly, obviously very tied into our agriculture. When our agriculture economy is down, it affects everything. So 2 or 3 years ago, when the price of corn and beef and everything was down significantly, we saw the effects on our tax revenue. Income taxes were down, sales taxes were down. That meant that there was less money going to our schools and our universities. So we had to cut faculty. We had to make cuts in our public education. Just as a case in point, everything in Nebraska economically eventually evolves around agriculture, and we can produce much more than we can eat domestically. So markets are vital. And so I think if you look at, when we look at foreign affairs, foreign policy, when it comes to the pocketbook, nothing can supplant trade. Secondly, and this is maybe a distant second, I think immigration is also a big factor. And I know that's a lot of maybe more domestic policy, but yeah, when you determine immigration policy, it's often with other countries. So for example, India has a huge backlog of people that want to come here. To fix that, it's going to take some foreign affairs and diplomatic work to do so. So most Nebraskans will tell you they want legal immigration, but not illegal immigration. And it's a very big difference for the average Nebraskan when you talk to them. By the way, I was as a 30-year Air Force guy, immigration was not in my top 10 as a military guy of issues. I mean, I worried about our military strength. I worried about tax policy. I was very familiar with that. I wanted a competitive tax policy. But when I looked at the issues, immigration for the average military person doesn't register that high. I mean, we're such an assimilated thing in the military, and it's you work with so many folks with so many different backgrounds that just doesn't hit it. But when I was campaigning at 16, I'd never run for anything before. I learned firsthand in town halls and forums that immigration is a hot button issue throughout Nebraska. But it's really about illegal immigration. That is a red button there. Now, interesting, there is a bit of a dichotomy. When I go around the state, most of your farmers and ranchers and a lot of your agriculture industry, they want more immigration because they can't fill their employment. We also have a need for more higher tech or higher skilled labor as well. But yet there's a pushback on it because the more of that you have, the lower the wages are generally because the labor's not in the highest demand. So there's a bit of a friction there. But when you generally, folks will say they need more workers and they can't find them right now. So immigration is also, I would say, one of the top priorities as it may pertain to foreign affairs. So those are probably the top 1 and 2. Now, if you ask the average Nebraskan about this, they may not come up with it, but in reality, it is a priority, and that is our national security. And so we have Offutt Air Force Base. It's the home of Strategic Command, which is our command center for all of our nuclear weapons, right? We have ICBMs in Western Nebraska. that are in the headquarters is in Wyoming, but the missiles are actually in Nebraska itself. So you may not ask the average Nebraskan, will say, yeah, national security is the number one thing when you think of foreign affairs. But in reality, if you don't have peace, then it is the number one priority. This right now, we generally have peace, right? And so people may not think about it. They think of the pocketbook issues. But I would say, frankly, the foreign affairs thing to me is the most important thing, because it helps build a peaceful world that I can live in, my kids and my grandkids can live in. Folks may not think about it day to day, but in reality, as a Nebraskan, I'm glad we're not in a war where I'm worried about my life, my kids' lives. We do have small skirmishes right now. We're still involved in Iraq and Afghanistan, but at a very small level compared to what it was. And so I don't want to discount what foreign affairs and foreign policy does. Because in reality, when you don't have peace, that is the number one issue. I think it's very important to have alliances. When I look at the, sorry, somebody's calling me, so I clicked the phone off. When I look at the world environment right now, our GDP is almost equal to China's, or theirs almost as equals to ours, right? And so their buying power almost matches ours right now. And so their ability to field a military they have the same capacity roughly as we do in funding a military. Russia has got the GDP of Mexico, but yet they have an ICBM, a nuclear force, submarines and bombers that matches ours. Then you have Iran, that's a regional threat. I guess what I'd like to talk to all of you about, Nebraska, maybe thinking about the pocketbook issues, but from a world security, we cannot be a defender of our values alone. I think our values are very important. Human dignity, free markets, rule of law, the things that embody what makes our country special. America's an indispensable state. The free world cannot defend themselves without us, but we cannot do it alone. So it's so imperative that we have alliances, that we can bond with other countries that share our values roughly. And so frankly, I think that's the number one thing that we have to work on when it comes to our foreign policy, because that eventually results in a peaceful environment for our kids and grandkids here in Nebraska. My fourth and final point, and we'll go to Q&A, is even when you talk to Republicans that are in their 20s and 30s, they'll tell you that the environment and climate change is a top issue. And we may have some different ways of going about skinning that cat. A lot of people don't realize in the last 10 years, America has decreased its emissions more than the next 12 countries combined, right? We've done it through innovation. Private industry has tackled it because their customers, their stockholders want it. So even without the heavy-handed government, America has moved forward in a much more greener way. Now, in Nebraska, by the way, people may not realize that in Omaha, 40% of our energy that we use to power our homes are renewable. It's an incredible feat if you think about it. 40%. But I would when I come back to the foreign policy of this, America could be the best you've ever seen. You pick your perfect policy on climate change. America, if we did it, it will not move the dial internationally. China, India, Russia, all these countries. So if you want to really make an impact on climate change and environment, it's got to be a cumulative effort. America can't do it. We can't move the dial on our own. So it needs to be, so I supported staying at the Paris talks. I didn't necessarily agree with the agreement that the Obama administration did. I thought there were some things that were not right about it. But the fact that we do need to be at the table if we want to make a difference worldwide. So with that, John, I'll yield back and take questions.
Okay, so I'll start with probably the simplest one. How America extend influence and exercise soft power with the tarnishment of last week, in your opinion?
It's going to take a while. I think we got tarnished there. And it's, I supported a lot of the conservative policies. But I would tell you, when you lose an election, and yes, you have access to courts, but when the courts rule against you, say 0 to 60, roughly, and when the states actually certify, at that point, it was time to pivot and accept defeat and commit to a peaceful transition of power, and that did not happen. And so I do find that I did find the president. I found him largely at fault on what happened with that. But I think the best thing that we can do in America, though it's hard when it's hyper-partisan, is that we actually can discuss this in a free way. Our freedom of the press, our freedom to debate. Sometimes it's ugly, but it allows us to get to the bottom of things and seal things. When you have a President Xi who can arrest journalists for talking about COVID in Wuhan, you don't get a free exchange of ideas. So we have the ability to discuss this if we can take maybe the venom and the gas off the fire a little bit and get to peel that onion back and learn from it. That makes our country special in that regard, if you ask me. But I do think that it was an embarrassment to have the world's greatest free country have that happen. There's no bones about it. And I think just having an honest discussion is a start there. We are going to have a peaceful transition of power on the 20th of January, and we'll move forward on that. And so I think in the end, I think too, it's important on the 6th of January that we didn't stop. We still did this vote certification, and we didn't let violence slow us down. Well, it slowed us down for 6 hours. So thank you.
All right, sir, a question from a local businessman, one of your constituents. Do you feel that the rancor and divisiveness in our country right now is hurting efforts to develop the right alliances overseas? As a Nebraska Republican, I think we need to shore ourselves up internally first in order to negotiate and develop relationships overseas. I guess a question is, does America need to retrench and recover before extending foreign influence, or do we have to do both concurrently, and if so, how?
Well, we got to chew gum and walk at the same time on a lot of this. It's going to take a while to figure out this vitriol is really, we need an honest discussion on it. There's a lot of finger pointing, but both sides have escalated. I'm just being, this is my view, and some of y'all may disagree. But most of the people that were in Washington on the 6th of January, by the way, were peaceful. You got to know that. I knew a lot of people there that were my friends that were there to protest me, but they were peaceful. And they didn't even know the violence that was going on in the Capitol itself. So we just got to say that up front. But you put yourself in their shoes, and I think it's important that we got to do that. Empathy is a very important thing. We're lacking it in our country. So I'd say put yourself in their shoes. The average person out there, this is what they're seeing. They saw 4 years of a president being attacked, a very biased media. They saw this thing about Russian collusion with Trump, that accusation that Adam Schiff put out there, and I think largely disproved by Director Mueller in the Mueller investigation. A lot of them have been called racist and anti-Semitic. You could get this is the baggage they wear. Now, I know that folks on the other side of the aisle, you got to put yourself in their shoes too, right? The crudeness, the name calling, President Obama, attacking his potential non-citizenship prior to that. I would just say you got to put yourself in people's shoes. What's going on here is we've started making each other the biggest enemies, and we should not be that way. But if you read my social media, you would like, wow, it looks like war on there. And I'll be attacked by my own side because I didn't support the president enough. To the point where people say you should be scared to walk down the street. These are Republicans telling me this, right? And I used to get that from the far left side. So I'm getting it from both sides right now. But we got to stop treating each other like we're the biggest enemies towards each other. And, we got bigger threats outside the world. I got to tell you, there's people in the Middle East that would want us all dead, right? And China wants to supplant us as the #1 country in the world. Russia works against us in every way they know how behind the scenes. And I got to tell you, just to put yourself and say 30 or 40 years from now, and say China has 30 or 40% higher GDP, what does our world look like? They don't value human rights, freedom of the press, freedom of speech. They have 1 million Uyghurs in jail. So they don't have freedom of religion. They go after home churches. My whole point is we got to work together to keep our country strong and work with other nations. So to get to our constituents comment, yeah, we got a lot of healing to do and we got some internal reflection, but we just can't walk away from the world because there will be long-term consequences. We need to maintain ties with Australia and Japan. We need to nurture better ties with India, who has a very non-aligned culture, right? That we need to pull them into our markets. They're very worried about China. That's their #1 threat. NATO's still relevant. If NATO's not there, I'll tell you the Baltic states are under great risk from Russia. I could go on and on. Without America's presence or activity, our world becomes more dangerous, and in the long run, it's more dangerous for our country. Thank you.
Okay, so another question. Congressman Bacon, how would you characterize the current state and future prospects of agricultural and industrial labor in Nebraska, and what are your primary concerns facing that labor? Specifically, what have the long-term trends in general welfare of the average Nebraskan worker been, pressures impacting them? So a general question about labor in Nebraska, how to improve the labor market, right, and ties in with your discussion about immigration earlier.
Well, there's some strengths and we got some weaknesses that we have to be candid about. Our strengths is no one can outcompete us in the agriculture side. You know, we're the only country in the world that spends less than 10% of its income on food. That is a blessing. We can outproduce anybody in the world: beef, pork, corn, soybeans, you name it, the mass production. That is a strength that we have. So we have to really work hard to open up markets. If we open up the right markets, we win. Right now, other countries know that, and they're trying to protect their farmers. But yet, while they're doing that, they're sending us Mercedes, French wine. You know, there's got to be some. There's got to be some equality there, or fairness to the trade. And our ag's largely been blocked out of a lot of markets because no one can compete against us. So there has to. I'm a free market person, but it's got to be fair. When somebody shuts their doors, but our doors are open, it's not fair to our citizens. But on the strengths of Nebraska, agriculture is a strength if we have the right trade policies put in effect. Also, when you look at all the studies, Nebraska is one of the most welcoming places for new businesses. It's a great place to do business. We're fiscally sound. We have a balanced budget. So those are strengths that we have. And you know, I lived in 16 places with the Air Force. I picked Nebraska because there was no friendlier place I've ever been. They were so welcoming to the people of Offutt. My family and I have 3 of my 4 kids living here. So, hey, we like Nebraska the best place we've ever lived, right? And so there's so many strengths there for that. On the other side of this, we do have a labor shortage in a way where, you know, we were sitting around 3% unemployment. That's good, but we got to be able to attract more labor and hold more labor. A lot of people go off to university and don't come back. So we got to find ways to keep our labor pool here if we want to grow economically. And the governor, I applaud him that he's identified our tax policies hurt us. So on one hand, our property taxes are undermining our agriculture. I mean, don't quote me on the exact number, but we're paying significantly higher percentage property taxes than, say, the South Dakota farmer or the Iowa farmer, which puts our farmers at a disadvantage, right? And so I know he's been working hard to get his arm around it, but it's most of that spending is not at the state level, it's at the county and school level, so it's a kind of problem. Also, if you look at our income taxes, more businesses would come here, but they've told me that our income tax does not make us competitive. So those are some things that if we want to draw in more business, I feel really good about what we've done. We brought in PayPal, Amazon, Facebook, you name it. We really have attracted some high-tech industry, and we have the ability to become Silicon Prairie out here. But those are some areas we got to work on. It is the labor force and tax policy.
So a follow-up to that, we've asked every participant to talk about infrastructure. You mentioned PayPal, Amazon coming into basically Southwest Omaha. how would you characterize the state's overall infrastructure and its ability for farmers, ranchers, producers to get their product to market both internally or domestically and to foreign markets via ports?
Interesting. When I've talked to some of our agricultural leaders, and this is going to blow your mind. It blew my mind when I heard it. They go, Don, the number one thing you can do is to improve the locks on the Mississippi. I go, now that came out of left field for me. But they want competition with the rail industry, is what they're saying. And I just thought that was fascinating to hear folks, the bigger agricultural leaders, to tell me that we need to improve our lock system. It's an outdated system. Brazil is making locks that are much more capable than ours, so they can bring their crops from the internal of Brazil eventually more inexpensively than we do. So I just share that with you as an aside, because I did not see that coming when I was talking to some of these business leaders or agriculture business leaders. We do got work to do in our infrastructure. Besides the lock system in our country, you know, a lot of our roads in Nebraska need work on. We need the wideband in the rural wideband. You know, I farmed till I was 21 years old on my family farm, and I would take me all day to disc or plant 50 acres, right? Today, you can do it in 2 hours, roughly. And the weird thing is, you don't even have to have your hand on the steering wheel. You know, for me, that's like, what? You know, I used to have to farm it, you know, with the hands on. And so all this equipment now with GPS, IP connections, our irrigation, you could turn them on from your living room. And they could tell you exactly, you know, what kind of moisture you have on the ground. This part of the field needs more moisture. This field needs less. It's incredible, but you can only do that with a rural wideband capacity. So I'd say that's another thing that we need to work on. And I know the governor has made that a priority. And I think it'll be one of our priorities in the federal side to help partner with states and locals and private. It can't be a federal bill only, but the federal bill can match to a certain level some of the investments there. So hopefully that answers your question.
It did, sir. One student has a question, and you, I don't know what this is, but maybe you will, or you can provide context. The FCC recently granted an $800 million to SpaceX and provide high-speed rural broadband via its Starlink constellation. You touched on farmers. Is it a matter of capacity for rural broadband, or rural connectivity, or it being everywhere so that if everyone can have access to that connectivity?
I think it's a little bit of both. But by the way, I had the briefing from SpaceX. Oh. It's phenomenal. You're like, what they're doing is incredible. And you're right, that may take away, it's an option for how to get broadband out. But I think it's right now that the capacity's not there. When we went to the lockdowns for COVID, a lot of our rural areas, because of the demand was so high, couldn't get wideband. So there is a capacity issue. And whether you do it from space or you do it from the ground with antennas, there's different ways to go about it. I don't like a single fail system. I like multiple ways to get information out. If you're dependent on one avenue, it's easy to take that down and then you're degraded.
Okay, different question. I'm not a Heartlander, and I keep hearing about people from the center of the country feel that they no longer recognize their country or something to that effect. Can you talk about this specific comment and how you feel this is a real attitude with Heartlanders in Nebraska, and how much is that as a result of changing demographics, or is it just a partisan issue?
If you look at the voting, rural areas go heavily red, voted for the president. In some areas more so than even in 2016. It didn't happen in Nebraska by and large. I think the president lost 2 or 3 points from, I gotta go back and double check. I know in my district, he fell back 8 points from 16 to 20, but Western Nebraska was a lot lost, maybe 1 or 2 points. But other parts of the red states, he actually went up in the rural areas. But if you look in the suburban and urban areas stayed about even, but the suburban areas is where the president really lost the election. 8 points in my district, for example. And you see that in Georgia, Pennsylvania. So there is a divide, at least politically. I think divide in some cultural ways. I think I relate because I was raised in a rural area. I'm a faith-based person. I think that's the most important, you know, faith and family and country, sort of how we were raised. And so you get to when you go to some of the urban areas in the east and the west part of our country, the two coasts, there is a big difference in that regard. You don't have that kind of focus to the same degree. Now, granted, I hate to generalize because you got people of all types everywhere, but you're talking about the majorities on the coast versus the majorities in the Midwest. Now, there is, you know, the term, you've all heard it, the flyover country. There is a sense that we are flyover country. That's one of the reasons why you'll have pushback on the Electoral College and things like that, because the Midwest is afraid that they won't become relevant. You just campaign on the coasts and you can win an election that way. So, but I do think there's a cultural divide and there's a political divide there. And I'd have to do more thinking beyond that. How do we fix that? But, you know, diversity in our country is all right. We've always had different political alignments in our country. You know, was it 30 years ago, Nebraska had mainly Democrats running the state. The whole point is our alignments change over time, you know, and if you had said 10 years ago that a president could win Ohio and Florida and still lose the race, people would have thought you're nuts. So these things change over time. And the best thing we can think of, though, is we have freedom. We have the freedom of speech, freedom of vote who we want, freedom of the press. We got to defend that. That's what makes us great.
Sir, another question from a student. How has your participation on any congressional delegations either shaped your views and helped you better inform your constituents? In other words, how do you relate foreign policy concerns back to your constituents in the Heartland?
Well, I've done a handful of CODELs. Of course, this past year we've done 0. I think it gives me the chance to offer firsthand experiences. My first CODEL was with Paul Ryan, who was the speaker. He went to 5 countries to speak to their prime ministers, presidents, or ministers of defense. This is when President Trump was newly elected. And his goal was to communicate the importance of NATO. So he says, Don, you were in NATO when you were in the Air Force. Can you come with me? I'm like, so I was newly elected. And so I got to go with him and 4 other more senior congressmen, Democrat and Republican. What a trip, you know. I got to meet Boris Johnson. And I got to meet the leaders of Norway and Poland. And to be able to come back and really share some of the firsthand of how these countries in a variety of ways saw America and what their goals and priorities were, you know, were telling. I've also gone to Taiwan. I see what they live under the threat of China every day. I spent time in Australia and in the Asian islands. And I thought it was interesting when you talk to some of the island nations that China's trying to invest billions of dollars and sort of buy their loyalty, right? And you talk to the leaders, so they go, we wish America was more out here offering the same. He says, but you can't put a price tag on freedom and the values that America represents. So we can't forget that. We could do a lot of diplomatic and a lot of economic investment, but in the end, the world sees our values, and most people want that. They don't want the dictatorship. So these kind of things you learn when you're traveling. I've done a lot of stuff in Afghanistan and Iraq, which a lot of people were worried about where we're going. And to talk to the presidents of those countries and the top military, I could relay firsthand what's going on. But one of the best things you get out of these CODELs, I've made lifelong friends with Democrats there, well, along with Republicans. I already know them by and large. You get to know Salud Carvajal. I've traveled all over the world with. He's a Democrat from California. And I don't always agree with him politically, but we've become very close friends. And where we can partner, we do all the time. Jimmy Panetta, I can go on. Lou Corella, a great guy, by the way. And so I feel like that's one of the positives you get out of that. So thank you.
Based on your oversight capacity in Congress, what disconnects do you see between U.S. trade policy and Heartland concerns? In other words, I guess a subsidiary question is the back and forth with we're in round 1 of the improved China trade. The effects are just now filtering in. What disconnects are there between U.S. trade policy big picture and Nebraskans and your constituents in the Heartland?
Well, one of the ones I saw 4 years ago, and we still have a little bit of that today. I don't know how Joe Biden will do it differently, but I think that Nebraska would have been better served under TPP, a multilateral trade, particularly out in Asia. And let me explain why. But before I do that, I have to remind people, Donald Trump was against TPP, but so was Hillary Clinton, right? So both sides were opposed to these multilateral trade deals. But here's the issue that came out of pulling out of that. China has become our biggest competitor, and there was unfair trade policy. The deal that we would have had with the TPP nations, and I think it was 12 countries, but don't quote me on that, it would have given us the inside game with these 12 countries, Japan, Indonesia, Australia, so forth, 12 in total, I believe. And we would have lowered the tariffs with each other all equally. China's tariffs, if they would have sold in, would have had a higher tariff. In other words, we would have had an economic alliance in the Far East that allowed us to compete against China much better. But because we pulled out of that, China now has been able to also do bilateral and some multilateral deals with these same countries while we're trying to get an agreement one at a time. I would just tell you, I think we fell behind in this competition with China because of that general situation there. We had a chance, and I'm not saying that what President Obama did with TPP needed to stay the same. We could have renegotiated aspects to it, right? But just to say pull out of it, it really, it made the job of China much easier there, as what I would say. In China, their GDP is nearing ours right now. They're making direct deals and multilateral deals as we speak. And so I would say the ground shifted against us somewhat because of that.
So how do you address constituents' concerns? And I know you're primarily a suburban district, but obviously you represent Nebraska. A viewpoint, right or wrong, and generally not supported by data though, is that trade screws Americans, that we lose more in trade. And it's primarily driven by job loss post-NAFTA. Again, not necessarily directly due to NAFTA, but American manufacturing generally being eviscerated. Something like 25% of manufacturing jobs were lost between, it actually occurred post-NAFTA, but actually the 2001 recession is what did it. How do you address those constituents' concerns that think these multilateral trade deals, WTO, et cetera, are quote unquote screwing them?
Well, I think it depends what's in the deals. I mean, just because it's a free trade deal doesn't make it free trade totally. So I'll go back to China. China basically had open access to our country. They made it very hard for us to do the same in their country. They would put barriers up. They were stealing our technology. They were, I would call it predatory trade and predatory economics. And yet we were sort of letting it happen, and yet they had access to our country. So a lot of our jobs sort of went that direction. And it was, but you know, for 20 years or more, and this is Democrat and Republican alike, the thought was, it's all right. China, we'll give them a while to get their feet on the ground, get their economy going. But as they get—
responsible stakeholder.
Yeah, we thought they would buy into the values of our world and they would conform. That was the assumption. By the way, I love studying assumptions. Assumptions, often you think something's going to happen, you don't even know it. You just assume it's sometimes it's not even a cognitive assumption. A lot of it's, you don't even know it. But bad assumptions kill. That's a military term, right? So you got to challenge your assumptions at all times. This assumption was bad. China actually did not liberalize. In fact, they are going the opposite direction right now. So we've had to reevaluate that. So I would say, I think if free trade, I think if it's free and fair, it's the best system in general, because in the end, the consumers benefit. And two, it creates innovation at a pace unlike any other system. So you get innovation, you get efficiencies, you get the best products at the best price to the citizens. But if one country's not playing by the same rules, well, then you gotta challenge it. And so if we made trade deals that didn't provide a more level playing field or allowed barriers to ours, That's unacceptable. And I think USMCA, I thought it wasn't, it was still NAFTA, but it was a much improved NAFTA. It took in intellectual property rights, it took in e-commerce, it took in a lot of things that weren't in the original NAFTA. And I think it also put in some demands on Mexico to say, hey, you can't pay $4 an hour at your car plants. You got to pay a more reasonable, livable salary for your auto workers. And so I think there was some good progress in USMCA, and that was I think it's going to be the model for a lot of the future negotiations that we do.
So a question from a constituent of yours. In regards to trade and foreign direct investment, what effects are you seeing from COVID-19? In other words, is Nebraska actually benefiting as one of the states that either remained open or is generally less affected? It's less dense, it's less populated, or has it been relative to its peers about the same effect of COVID-19?
I'm not sure if how does it relate to foreign direct investment? I'm not sure if I'm getting a connection.
Has COVID-19 slowed down FDI in Nebraska or affected it at all?
Well, I think it has had some impact, but I don't have the data at my fingertips on it. I think, the whole world economy probably went backwards about 5%, right? So that's going to have an impact there. So I'm hoping if we get with these vaccines, we can rebound here pretty quickly. But I would just have to say my gut reaction to the question is there has been a negative impact just because the rest of the world, the whole world has had their economy go backwards to a degree. And it's going to take the vaccine, I think, to allow people to start traveling again and start meeting face to face. And so I think I see the light at the end of the tunnel, and but it can't come fast enough.
Yeah, agreed, sir. A question from a student. The background of this is this trip, which obviously is normally not virtual, is endorsed by the Carnegie Foundation, which is a next door neighbor to SAIS there in DC. And they put out a study of the Heartland in Nebraska specifically last year, and it indicated an erosion of public trust from Nebraskans towards the national security establishment and foreign policy in general. And this is a one-year survey, so it's not exactly long-term. But so the question is, from your position as a member of the Armed Services Committee, what is your assessment of civil-military relations and where the national security, foreign policy professionals stand in view of the public?
I do think there has been some erosion. You see an increasing politicization of our intelligence, our law enforcement, the FBI level, Justice Department. You don't really see politicization within the military itself, but you do with the retired generals, which reflects on the military, unfortunately. And so you see an increase of this partisan divide. And so put yourself again in the Republican shoes, and you see, okay, 4 years ago we had an election, and the story was there was Russian collusion with Trump, but it originated, a lot of it, from a dossier paid for by the Clinton team. And then the FBI gets involved, and Comey sort of knew what was going on, but he pursued this investigation. There was some wiretapping going on. The whole point is, I know there's more to the story, and I simplified it. And you can say, people on the other side look and say it wasn't quite that way. But the point is, people on the conservative side sort of see it that way, right? And so there's a suspicion right now towards the FBI leadership. Now, the rank and file surely don't have that suspicion, but there is suspicion on the seniors of FBI leadership, the Department of Justice, as a fallout of what happened 4 years ago, right? And then you look at CIA under Brennan. He was very political. And so there is probably that going on there. And I was warned when I was a one-star from the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Shelton, by the way, great guy. Or no, it's Dempsey, my bad, Dempsey. And he goes, when you retire, yeah, get out and vote, but don't become a political activist unless you run for government. And so I decided to run. But what we're seeing is a huge group of 4-stars and 3-star generals out there, and they've become very politically active. And it's undermine, and it has an impact on the military view, because people, if you say you're a retired 4-star, and I hate this guy or that guy is good, you know, that sort of besmirches the entire military. But the military active duty itself, for the folks in uniform, I find they're straight and narrow. They're gonna do their job, and I believe our chairman is professional as they come, right, Millie. So one thing that concerns me, and I'm a conservative, when I hear someone, two 3-star generals, I won't even mention their name, talk about martial law, the Insurrection Act, that makes me mad as hell. Why are these guys even talking that way, right? It's disgusting. That we are, one of the things that makes our country great is a peaceful transition of power. You know, it's not the only thing that makes us great, but it's surely a very important feature. And to have 2 different retired 3-star generals throwing around martial law and the Insurrection Act to force a re-election, it's just wrong. But you know, if you're the average citizen, you're looking at that and you're like, wow, you know. So I think there has been a degradation of confidence, and shame on us for letting it happen.
Yeah, to echo your point from General Dempsey, the challenge is in the public, they get the title even if they're retired, whereas like you, sir, you've run and you're known as congressman as opposed to former general. Right. I think that's the public doesn't make that distinction. That's not conducive to a healthy profession of arms. Right. With that said, what was your opinion? What's your thoughts on the chairman and all the chiefs' memo last week about the election?
I thought it was said very well. I read it. I thought it was perfectly well written. You know, I'm a conservative. The guy, I didn't vote for Joe Biden, I'll say it that way. But you know what? In the end, we honor the elections. And yeah, we had the court processes, and if someone thought there was fraud, there are legal avenues, but there were 60 different, 62 to be precise. I read the court cases, by the way, and a lot of people say they lost on standing. That's not true. In some cases they did. There were some of the court cases, Trump appointed judges said, show me the evidence. And it didn't happen, right? And so you got to walk away from that, the court side of that, and say, you know, the voters spoke. And then you had, out of the 6 states, you had 5 states had Republican legislatures. Did they object? No, only one objected. They did on 5 January, 3 weeks after the safe harbor date for the Electoral College. They needed to do that November, December. 2 of the states have GOP governors, and they defended their vote. So you had to put yourself in our shoes, or my shoes at Congress. I look at the evidence, and tangible, we had 4 hours of debate. No fraud was ever mentioned in the 4 hours of debate, right? So trying to get back to it. Somebody got on a tangent there. Got to figure out how to come back to the actual answer to it. Is, what was your actual question again? I got sidetracked.
Just comment on if there's a trust disconnect between Heartlanders and national security professionals.
I think I did answer that. I think there was a follow-on question there. I got on a tangent. To make a long story short, we need to. Well, okay, it gets back to the letter from the chair, the 4 stars there. So what they were saying, they were honoring the will of the voters in their letter, and that we respect the peaceful transition of power. And it was absolutely right. I thought it was well done.
Okay, sir, we're about out of time. I'll give you the floor for any closing comments relating Heartland issues to American foreign policy.
Well, I sure appreciate the opportunity, and I don't claim to be an expert. You know, I would say I'm a layman, but I love reading, and I try to participate in the committee hearings. I like meeting with I have a natural like for foreign affairs and national security there, so that's really my wheelhouse. But I do know from working with all the business leaders and agricultural leaders, the importance of the trade discussion that we have here today. I got to tell you, we had a governor that's made it one of his top priorities. He's worked so hard to open up doors all over the world for Nebraska products. And to me, it sort of underlies, what I was saying as well, it sort of proves the point there. But our country has tended to put its emphasis on the military side of this. And we have underfunded traditionally more the diplomatic side of that. But we got to realize that one of our instruments of power is the diplomatic power there. We can't take our eyes, we can't forget that. I look at what Pompeo has done in the Middle East. It is, say what you want, there's pros and cons out there on the views of the administration, but the Abraham Accords were groundbreaking. And so it's just a case of point what you can do diplomatically. And in fact, they went against a paradigm. The paradigm was you got to get peace with the Palestinians first with Israel before you can get to the Arab states. So they flipped it on its head. Now we're pulling in Arab states, and really it's putting pressure on Palestine now to come to the table and make a deal. And so I just think that's such a great success that it's a good example of what you can do in the diplomatic realm. So thank you for the opportunity.
Sir, thank you very much for your time, and I hope you enjoy this blizzard and don't go out driving.
I'm looking right out my window right now. It's not looking pretty.
Yeah, it's a little sporty. Congressman, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, Dan, are you on?
Yeah, give me 1 second. Let me get the video going for you.
No problem. All right. Our final guest today is Mr. Dan Dunham. Mr. Dunham is the military legislative assistant to Nebraska Senator Deb Fischer. He serves as a policy advisor on issues. He serves as a policy advisor on issues of national defense, managing the senator's work as a senior member of the Senate Armed Services Committee. His policy focus includes national security, security cooperation, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance issues, as well as security issues in sub-Saharan Africa. While serving on the senator's staff, Mr. Dunham has authored numerous provisions adopted in multiple iterations of the NDAA, including strengthening security cooperation programs, mandated minimum aircraft inventory capability for the Air Force, ISR integration, and oversight for the National Defense Strategy. Prior to joining Senator Fischer's national security team, Mr. Dunham was the military legislative assistant to Bill Schuster of Pennsylvania 9th District, senior member on the House Armed Services Committee. During his tenure, Dan spearheaded a number of reform-focused legislative efforts, including drafting of H.R. 1916, the Patriot Inventory Protection Act, to maintain the Army's Patriot missile system, and H.R. 1338, the Dignified Interment of Our Veterans Act, a VA-directed study of improper burial and storage of unclaimed veterans' remains, signed into law in 2015. He served on multiple political campaigns, including Mitt Romney's presidential campaign and Senator Mark Kirk and Congressman Bob Dole congressional campaign. Dan, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Great. Well, I appreciate the introduction, and it's great to follow Rep. Bacon up. Obviously, Nebraska delegation is relatively small, and our two bosses, my boss and Congressman Bacon, have a unique relationship with him being on the HASC and her on the SASC. So, I hope you all got a chance to learn from him, and I'll try to follow that up. But obviously, want this to be kind of an informal conversation, and hopefully we can all kind of learn from each other a little bit here. You heard a little bit about my background. I think, the subject for this is really appropriate, especially right now, I think, as a lot of the issues related to foreign affairs and national security and how that links up with heartland issues and what's on the minds of voters is really sort of at the forefront of a lot of the national conversation right now. Being an elected official, working for an elected official, you are sort of at the nexus of that conversation. You have to be responsive to your constituents. You have to represent their interests in Washington. But, that can be a challenge when you're on the Armed Services Committee, and a lot of the issues that you're debating, deal with foreign places, very specific conflicts, subjects that may not be particularly resonant to Nebraska, citizens. Just off the top of their heads, they might not have heard of some of these places. So, I like to give a little example. One of the programs that we have worked on quite a bit over the last 2 years in my tenure with the senator has been a National Guard state partnership. For those who aren't familiar, the National Guard has a state partnership program where we engage in security cooperation programs. You'll link up a state National Guard with a foreign country and create a sort of standing relationship. You'll go and you'll train, their partner forces, do joint exercises. You'll bring them over to your state, and you'll do similar things here. There's opportunities for, military education to take place. But the best part about it is because of the National Guard force, you have that kind of continuity that exists. You can develop those relationships over time. So we actually stood up a partnership with Rwanda and Nebraska formally in December of 2019. Now, you might not think of Rwanda and Nebraska as having any particular linkage in common, but ironically enough, they have a lot of similarities. There's a big agriculture focus in Rwanda. The third largest population of foreign students at the University of Nebraska is actually a group of about 200 Rwandan students that are coming over on a formal scholarship program where they study at the College of Agriculture and Natural Resources. So they use that training, they go back to Rwanda, they take some of those sort of sustainable farming techniques and they apply them in their communities. In addition to that, the State Department actually just announced this week that they're formalizing a UPEX program with Rwanda. It's a linkage between US universities and specifically African universities. And we're doing that now between Rwanda and Nebraska, University of Nebraska. So it's just a distillation of how this sometimes works. You know, nobody would off the top of their heads point to this one country in Africa and say that, you know, it has any connection to Nebraska. But the reality is when you start peeling that onion back, we actually do. And those communities come together in really interesting ways. You know, we are fortunate enough in Nebraska to host a very large military installation. Those who are from the state are familiar with Offutt Air Force Base. You know, in addition to STRATCOM, we have the 55th Wing, which is conducting global operations. You know, it's the longest deployed force in CENTCOM, for example. Congressman Bacon, formerly of the 55th Wing, knows that better than anybody. You know, and so we have a presence around the world in many of these different places. We have Nebraskans who are deployed and serving in uniform at the forefront of a lot of these conflicts that are so central to our national security. You know, and then taking it right back to the current situation with COVID-19, the University of Nebraska was one of the pioneering institutions that started doing clinical trials on COVID-19 vaccines. They've done testing on Air Force airframes to determine how the airflow takes place within them so that they can get a better understanding how viruses spread on aircraft. You know, and that work then, you know, is applied around the world on behalf of Nebraska. So, you know, I think that there's a lot that, you know, the typical Nebraskan would kind of identify as being important to them when they think about what do they want to see with regard to our foreign policy. You know, we all do. Look, the country is in a kind of a tough place right now. I think that we would all agree that we're much more divided than we used to be. But the fortunate thing about working in national defense is that we actually still have a lot of kind of common themes and values that I think when you take away the partisanship apply for most people. Everybody wants to be safe and secure. We all agree we want the United States to be a place where we can, you know, be free from the concern of terrorism or foreign attack aggressors that would seek to do us harm. We want prosperity. You know, open markets are important for everybody. Whether you're a rancher. Interestingly enough, you know, my boss, Senator Fisher, she does not have a national security background. She is your prototypical example of an everyday American who decided to run for office because she wanted to make a difference. She's a cattle rancher by trade, you know, so she had to get smart quick on a lot of these issues. And she's done so admirably. She's a very intelligent woman, and sometimes I struggle to keep up with her. But you know, she can tell you better than anybody how you have to forge those connections and kind of make clear to people that, you know, what we do in other places, whether, you know, it's an ocean away or not, has an impact back home because the people who are producing products in the United States want to have a market for those things. And likewise, we want to be able to procure things from abroad, you know, and that system is central to our way of life. So it's important to maintain it. I think, you know, another issue that sort of has risen to the top of the public mindset right now is making sure that people's interests are represented in their foreign policy abroad. I think sometimes it can, you know, people can feel a little bit like there is a disconnect between what's happening at home and what's happening internationally. And everybody wants to believe that those shared ideals and democratic norms and values of the United States are being expressed in other countries and in other places. And so, you know, it's easy to get hamstrung and start thinking about all the ways that we disagree. But the fact is, I think on foreign policy issues and particularly in national security, you know, there is still a lot of agreement, and we're fortunate enough as a committee, both the HASC and the SASC, House Armed Services and Senate, to pass a bill that generally does receive overwhelming bipartisan support. You know, Congress has changed quite a bit as an institution, even in the time, you know, I've been on the Hill for almost 10 years now, and even in that time, it has shifted quite a bit. But, you know, fortunately, that bill still maintains its bipartisan status and attracts a lot of support from people who have disparate interests across the spectrum, you know, almost to its detriment. In fact, one of the interesting things that's now happened is the NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act, is considered such a must-pass bill that other committees have sort of wisened up to this. And now we're having additional policy provisions kind of tacked onto it. And it risks in the long term expanding to the point where that becomes an issue. We're not quite there yet. It's one of those institutional churns that we're kind of working through. But I think that, even in the face of the president's veto of that bill this year, due to some of his concerns with outstanding issues not related to defense, you still had a bipartisan majority come together and get that bill passed. So, it's tricky. I think that there's a lot of, half of this is being responsive to what people in the heartland want to see out of their representatives in foreign policy, and also doing a better job as working professionals in foreign affairs and national security of explaining to them what we're doing and how it does relate back home. And that's one of the interesting things about Congress is we really do kind of sit at that fulcrum point. We frequently get constituent inquiries and concerns and people writing in asking, why did you do such and such? How does this, relate to us? And you have to be in a position to kind of respectfully explain it to them. So, it's a challenge, but, I think now more than ever, particularly as we start looking at, many of the challenges we're facing, and I don't know if Congressman Bacon kind of addressed this, but, I think that for my money, one of the biggest challenges that we're going to have is just the wholesale realignment we have to do as a government and as institutions to address major power competition. It has been such a significant change in the way that the world works and our ability to respond to it, that's going to be a challenge that endures, I think, for the foreseeable future in a lot of ways. And we're still figuring out how to do that. But I don't know that the public perception has fully caught up to it, to be completely honest. I think that if you polled most people, they probably don't appreciate how much Russia and China have closed the gap with the United States. And there is a little bit of a delay there. So I think that the urgency sometimes that we express, we're working in this field, talking about how important it is that we address these issues, it sometimes falls on deaf ears a little bit. I don't think that, it's easy to understand because we've become very accustomed to the United States being kind of this preeminent power in the world. And as that global landscape changes, I think we got to keep educating people on how and why there's an impetus for us to stay engaged and continue investing in these things because they really do matter, and when somebody goes and travels internationally and they're used to people generally knowing English and understanding our kind of customs and ways of life and, the dollar being the system that undergirds the global economy, you can't take it for granted because it's not necessarily going to be there forever. So, but, I love to hear any questions that anybody has. There's a lot to talk about. I'm happy to kind of engage on any subject that you guys want to delve into. That's kind of my bit, but yeah, we can take it from there.
Okay, Dan, thanks much. So first question, you represent a relatively new legislator, and she came in and there's a typical disconnect for Heartland voters, and it goes something along the lines of this: why are we paying all this money? There's a liberal side of it, and it's why are we paying all this money for defense when we don't need to do it? National security / defense. And there's a conservative argument of we shouldn't be involved all over the world, and it's a waste of money and or time. And there's plus and minuses to both sides of the argument. But talk about how you, I don't want to say sell the current system, but as you brought a new legislator into this world of national security and foreign policy, what were some of her takeaways as she learned about this apparatus, both good and bad?
This is a great question because this is a conversation I have with my family members all the time in the holidays. Basically, there's
people.
Yeah, there's two major kind of components to this, right? The first one you hear all the time is, how in the world are we spending $700 billion on national defense and, we can still barely manage to keep up with Russia and China? How is that possible? How are we not secure with all this money we invest in the national security apparatus? And I think the simplest answer to that is, if you took any agency in the federal government and you said, we spend X amount of money, it's a lot. And it's a lot more than it used to be. And it's going up over time. But we all know that inflation is a thing. You can't talk about these things in absolutes. I think the most telling metric to use is look at national security spending as a proportion of GDP. How much are we spending in relation to what we're spending on everything? And if you look at it that way, the reality is we're actually spending at relatively historic lows. We've decreased to a level that we haven't seen in quite some time. And interestingly enough, we're doing it at a time when the world is looking a lot more like it was looking in the run-up to World War II than it was looking during kind of the peace dividend and all these other areas where we've traditionally cut defense spending. So yes, it's a lot of money, but historically, and as a portion of all of the money we're spending, it really isn't. And we're getting a lot of bang for our buck in the money that we do spend. I think that was one of the conversations that the senator and I had that was probably the most illuminating for her, you know, and she's always had an inclination towards being kind of a strong on national defense type of person, regardless of the office she holds. But, you know, and that's one that I frequently talk to constituents about too, because it really does, I think, hammer home how, you know, you can't just talk about the absolutes. It is a ton of money, sure, but, you know, we also have a lot of, you know, the government's spending a lot of money in general, and it tends to increase over time. So, you know, foreign engagement and particularly foreign aid, it's a perennial whipping post, you know, on the Hill, because it's an easy target, and it's easy to say, you know, with tightening our belts, why would we be giving all this money away? And I can distill that into a really specific example, right? So as you all probably knew, the other week we passed 2 bills concurrently. There was a COVID relief bill, and there was our annual appropriations bill. Traditionally, we'll do those appropriations bills on their own. You'll pass a defense appropriation, you'll pass a foreign affairs appropriations, and so on. This year, because we were pressed for time and things got a little bit crazy with the election, we wrapped all those up into one omnibus because we were getting to the end of the clock, and Congress loves to push up against deadlines, and holidays are a great incentive. Right before Christmas, we passed that annual appropriation with the COVID relief package. 2 different bills, but passed in one measure for expediency's sake. Now, we can all talk about that and know that amongst ourselves on Capitol Hill, but the average voter back home, all they see is you pass this giant package and you're giving all this money away to Sri Lanka and to Pakistan and to all these other places when we're hurting in the middle of a pandemic. And people got really angry about it, you know? And unfortunately, I think that part of that is on us. I don't think that there was a very good job done of explaining this to the American public and making it absolutely crystal clear that these are 2 different things, and that one of them happens every year, and that we are in fact passing foreign assistance funding that has historically been done. It was requested by this administration, and in some cases we actually appropriated less than they asked for. So there was nothing unusual about it. This was not COVID relief to all these foreign places. The one that got kind of written in about the most was people said, well, you know, you're giving all this money to gender programs in Pakistan, which, you know, I mean, look, yes, that may seem like a one-off kind of frivolous use of money, but foreign assistance is less than 1% of the federal budget. And if we can do a little bit to empower women in Pakistan to become more civic-minded, more engaged in their government, it increases the likelihood that their system of government looks more like ours, and that those democratic norms perpetuate themselves, you know, as part of this system of the global community that we hope looks like what we have here at home. And that's a good thing. It empowers people. So, you know, I think that when you tell people it's less than 1% of the budget, they really don't, you know, it doesn't align with what they hear in the news. They think it's a lot more. So it's tricky. I understand, but, you know, I think part of it is continuing to do that education.
But just broadly, when these new reps or you are asked to relate the cost of the American national security enterprise, for better or worse, what's the general breakdown? Like if you had to explain it to you work in campaigns in Illinois, right? And now you indirectly represent Nebraskans. How do you convey that aspect of American foreign policy? And I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but it's like, how do you explain it? You give an example of foreign aid. What about just general defense spending?
Yeah, I think that, you know, you have to, there's a couple pieces to that. First of all, generally, I don't think people understand where the defense dollars go. And a lot of that is just man, train, and equip. You have to, you know, soldiers are expensive. They eat, they sleep, they need equipment, you know, outfitting them costs a lot of money. And we want to give them the best equipment that we can. We don't always do. We should always continue to do better. Anybody who's been in uniform can tell you a lot of that stuff's not great, but, you know, it's expensive. And, you know, unfortunately, it costs more money to make things in the United States. We know that, but when it comes to national security, we want to build it at home. So there's a little bit of a premium placed there. We also have to have, you know, new innovative systems. We're encouraging the defense industrial base to build better, build quicker, build faster. You know, and we are always trying to make sure that the American taxpayers' money is being used in the most responsible way possible. You know, we have made a lot of reforms over the last few years, particularly sort of the FY 17-18 NDAAs, institute a lot of acquisition reform measures that I think are getting the American taxpayers some pretty good bang for their buck. So, you know, all of that adds up to building the military that we need to stay safe. And frankly, when it comes to the defense investment piece of it, you know, what I tell people is, look, we'd rather fight them over there than over here. We got to have the operations ongoing to be able to defend the American public. And if we're proactive about it and we're tackling those threats before they become critical, and we're doing it in places where there are power vacuums overseas, it reduces the likelihood that we're going to have something happen here at home, and I think that's the best case you can make.
Can you talk about a lot of SAIS students will either work on the Hill or for a congressman or as part of the permanent staff or for a rep. Can you talk about the interaction between the congressional staff and the committee and or permanent staff?
Sure. Yeah. It's for anybody that's interested in getting involved in this line of work. It is the most rewarding job I've ever had in my life. It's fascinating. You are learning every day, sometimes about things that are really cool, like, future Air Force, posture and design concepts, and then things that are really mundane, like why we should continue to buy wool peacoats for the Navy. It really depends on the day. Depends on what the issue du jour is. But the interaction is interesting. The PSMs, we call them professional staff members who are permanently tenured to the committee, they technically work for the chairman. So, every committee gets a certain number of staff. There's the majority staff and the minority staff. The majority gets more. And they're sort of the brain trust. They have a little more longevity. PSMs tend to have a little more experience. They've usually been around longer. And typically people keep those PSM jobs for a longer amount of time than your average personal office staffer sticks around. Part of that is just pay. Part of it is that when a new chairman comes in, some of them will replace those staff, but generally they keep most professional staff on board. And so, their job is to make sure, and I'll speak about, the defense committees, because that's my experience. Their job is to make sure that we get a defense bill every year. So, when there's a sequence of events that happens every single year that we go through in creating a defense authorization bill, and it starts with the release of the president's budget. When that happens, those professional staff on the Armed Services Committee are going to sit down and start deciding, okay, based on the policy guidance, the overarching guidance set out by our chairman, what do we want to do at a programmatic level? And depending on what your issue set is, you're going to start making decisions about where funding is going to go up, where it's going to go down versus that request. And then some of the policy specific proposals outside of the money piece, that you might focus on. So like, Chairman Thornberry on the House side was very big on acquisition reform. So he kind of sent a directive out to his staff to work on that. Chairman Inhofe, on the Senate side, we had a lot of issues with military housing last year, which, was a big cause of concern. We were very upset to see some of the issues and conditions being reported on these private military housing. So we did a top to bottom reform of the oversight of military housing sites, and that's kind of their role. As a personal office staffer, what I'm trying to do is do what's best, obviously, for the country and for the national defense, but also represent my boss's interest and stake and the things that she's kind of set out to me as being her priorities. So some of those are policy proposals that we're drafting and we're trying to get inserted in that bill. And that's a kind of a constant conversation with them. We got to reach some kind of an agreement where they're willing to put it in their bill, or I'm willing to make changes that make it palpable to them. Now, we don't always get there. At the end of the day, I try to cooperate as much as possible, but sometimes you reach a point where it's like, this is a good idea. We want to get it. We have to overcome opposition from the committee. You've always got levers to pull. If you can't get it in the base text of that NDAA, what you'll typically do is we'll introduce an amendment, usually during the markup of the bill, which happens, once the president's budget comes out, they write the bill. They'll give a copy, usually in the late spring after we've had a bunch of hearings with all of the senior leaders from DOD. They come in, they talk about their global threats. They talk about kind of what their budget, what their specific service branch request contains and why. It's our chance to ask those questions. So, with Offutt, we work a lot on Air Force programs. If the Air Force asks for, an additional amount of money for the RC-135 to do X, Y, or Z, in a hearing, my boss might ask Secretary, Barrett, hey, what are you planning on doing with this money? So eventually the first draft of that NDAA comes out. We have a chance to amend it as a committee in markup. And then it moves to the full floor. You get another bite at the apple. You can introduce amendments there if you want to change things. And then it goes to conference and we kind of reconcile the House and Senate versions. Both committees have a healthy rivalry, which has been really interesting to see from both sides. When I was a House staffer, I complained unendingly about the Senate. And now that I'm a Senate staffer, I complain pretty consistently about the House. So those things just don't change.
What's your assessment of how well members are informed about foreign policy from the national security establishment? So how well is the oversight function with regard to the CIA or state performed such that members can relatively make informed decisions?
I think generally it works pretty well. You know, I think that we actually, you know, we're fortunate enough in that the vast majority of the national security establishment is extremely professional. They're very, very hardworking men and women. I've seen it across, you know, DoD, state. You know, there are political interests at stake, but the overwhelming group of them are very, you know, very good at their jobs and very willing to kind of share with us. Sometimes we're at loggerheads on political issues, but you know, they're very helpful in getting us the information we need. And I think that when they have briefings with members of Congress, they generally provide a good amount of information. I've seen the politicization of some elements of that more in the last few years. And you know, that is a kind of a concerning trend a little bit. But generally speaking, I think that they get us what we need, and it's helpful. You know, the level of kind of comprehension among staff and individual members of Congress, it varies. They're human beings. You know, that's one of the difficulties. And I think that in a way, this larger issue of misinformation and disinformation spreading is a problem that Congress needs to wrestle with as well. You know, we're not immune from it. You see it sometimes where a nugget of information gets into the head of a couple members of Congress or staffers, and it becomes sort of something that's orthodoxy, and that has a way of taking on a mind of its own, and that can be a problem. You know, so we're kind of wrestling with that, you know, and there's a lot of mistrust right now, I think, just generally speaking. But I think the core elements of it are sound, and we do get some pretty good feedback. So you know, I've never had an issue in getting information that I need. Sometimes you got to push harder than in others, but yeah, it's good.
Next question is from a student. Have you been on any staff delegations, and how have those experiences informed the reps you've worked for?
I have actually. I've been on quite a few, and they're great. It's really, I think that you gain more out of a 2 or 3 day staff del than you do from any number of briefings. It is. It's very helpful. I've done, you know, there's 2 common kinds that you'll see on the Hill. You'll do staff dels to go to DoD installations, you know, is probably the most common for me. It's a way of just doing oversight. You know, I can come out there, I can meet with the teams and have, you know, conversations with the different groups. That, you know, the 55th Wing is where I'm frequently at the most. But, you know, any number of places, and you have a chance to, one, you know, get it from the horse's mouth without legislative affairs being involved. And I love those guys, but, you know, sometimes some of the truth gets glossed off of the message when you're going through the, you know, the people who are polishing it up for the Hill. And, you know, you get a little hands-on perspective from the airmen and service members who are kind of briefing you. They can be really candid because they're in the weeds on this. You know, I mean, it's like any other organization. There is a DC component to it, and people who can, you know, brief it on a slide deck, but the guys who are flying the planes, you know, or driving the tanks or doing whatever, they live and breathe this stuff. And you'll get anecdotes out of that. I have most of the ideas that I have had that I think I'm the most proud of have been things I've jotted down in notepads while speaking with, you know, folks out of bases during staff dels. Somebody says, hey, we've been having a problem with X or Y, or there's this thing that's been, you know, and it turns into a, you know, people change laws that way. Sometimes inadvertently, but, you know, I think for the better. And then we also do, they're called MECA trips. MECEA, it's mutual exchange of cultural education and knowledge, something. I've got the acronym wrong, but essentially there's an agreement with certain foreign governments are authorized to bring congressional staffers overseas to come to their country and provide state-sponsored trips to come and interact and exchange information. And we do it for them too. It's supposed to kind of build, you know, better ties and share with them how, you know, we do things, and they show us how they do things. And those are helpful too. You know, I've learned a lot on those trips as well, but, you know, for my specific day-to-day job, being in an oversight role for DoD, I'd say the staff dels are hugely helpful.
Thank you. How would you characterize, and I hate using this term, but how would you characterize the NDAA and DoD's transition to great power competition, just broadly?
So we have a lot of work to do still. The most heartening thing that I can say is that despite the fact that we are laboring under essentially flat defense budgets, you know, the very small increase that we've seen, you know, in the last couple of years really is not, it's just not going to cut it. If we want to get to where we need to be, we're going to need to spend more, although I don't see that happening anytime soon. But despite the fact that we're not investing a whole lot more in defense spending, I do think DoD has gotten the message. I really think that the National Defense Strategy was a foundational document, and they did a fantastic job. It really does. It encapsulates what the threats are, you know, what the issues are. It suggests some venues for addressing them. And I was really happy to see the department sort of take that to heart, internalize it. You know, they really seemed, because we've seen this before, right? Strategy documents are only as good as the paper they're printed on. Anybody can write a strategy. You know, they get tossed out all the time and they get put in a bookshelf somewhere. This one actually landed, and I feel like it really got taken to heart. And it was a case where DoD did the right thing with their strategy document. And I think Congress really picked up on it, and it helped that members could understand it. It was easy to process for them. And as a result, they kept bringing it up again and again and again in hearings. I mean, my boss, every time we had a hearing with a major, you know, service secretary, NDS was one of the subjects. Our chairman, you know, Chairman Inhofe, has a copy that he holds up in every hearing. So that's been encouraging. Now, I think when we look back on all this in 20 years, the question will be, do we align the resources to that strategy to really see it through to fruition? I think that the cultural shift is happening. But we gotta make the investments to carry it through. And you know, with the new administration coming in, I don't know, we're at an interesting time to see how that bears out. I don't want it to be one of those cases that historians study and they say, well, you know, America saw it coming. It's just crazy, but they didn't do anything about it. We'll see. But I think the strategy was good, and the NDAA has supported that.
What does the NDAA do for climate change? A lot of service secretaries and chief staff have talked about addressing it. But is there anything specific in the NDAA that deals with that?
There is actually. So, you know, climate change is one of those issues that DoD is addressing like any other threat. You know, there are major concerns about resiliency for installations as a result of changing climate. DoD has done internal studies looking at this already. There's been some language in the last two NDAAs asking them to look at that issue and study how that might affect some DoD installations. You know, and frankly, we've seen that, you know, the incident, the severe weather event at Tyndall. You know, I'm not enough of an expert to say whether the flooding at Offutt was seasonal or whether it was climate change related. All I know is that 2/3 of our runway was underwater, and
it's going to be out for a year and a half starting in March.
Yep. I've got pieces of that runway, the old runway, sitting on my desk at work. So yeah, I mean, it's a problem. We can't, you know, I think that one of the nice things about DoD is that if a threat is a threat, it's not political, it's just a threat. And this is one of those instances where, regardless of what politicians want to say on climate change, that's, you know, something that they've been working on already. So there is some stuff in there, and I suspect that as that kind of, particularly in the new administration, will probably be more of a focus, but I know that they're working on it.
Are there any specific Heartland related concerns that are brought to you by members during development of the NDAA and other legislation in the committee?
I think that there is a perception that anybody who is from the middle part of America has, which is that we are frequently underrepresented in Washington. You know, there's a lot of strong lobbying communities for the coasts and for, you know, some of the bigger defense states that tend to attract a lot of new projects and installations. You know, you've got your Texas and your California and your Virginias out there. But for those of us in sort of, you know, flyover country, we're providing a huge portion of the nation's manpower. We've got people, you know, serving in every branch. We've got a lot of our own very important installations. And I think just making sure that our voice is part of that conversation, and that Heartland states are considered for these new projects and bases, and are, you know, are viewed as being essential kind of in that bigger security conversation is one of the things we have to maybe work a little bit harder at. And I think we've had, you know, to good end. It just requires a little bit more collaboration. The nice thing too about it is that there's more, I think that there's more kind of shared overlap. You know, my first job on the Hill in a defense capacity was working for a Pennsylvania member. We worked within the delegation, but it was kind of, you know, it was within the sort of members who were around our district, whereas Nebraska's delegation is really closely linked. But we also work with Iowa quite a bit because, you know, we have so much connection with them. So I think that you see kind of more banding together among the Heartland states. But, you know, I think just making sure that we're part of that conversation is probably the biggest challenge.
All right, Dan, that's all the questions you have. Do you have any closing comments for the group?
No, I really appreciate the chance to talk to you guys. You know, feel free to share my contact info with everybody who's kind of been listening in. And I would just end by making a pitch and saying that if you're at all interested in this line of work, it is extremely rewarding and very challenging, but in a really good way. And despite everything that has been going on lately, I know it's been a really challenging time for everyone, particularly those of us on Capitol Hill, but I think for everybody in the country. The heartening thing is that, you know, I see day to day that there's a lot of unity still. There are a lot of good people doing these jobs, and you know, we all get along when it comes to the important things, and you know, that's why we've passed an NDAA for 50 years. So it's you know, it's the wheels are still moving. But I would say if anybody's interested in getting involved in this kind of work, it's really great.
All right. Thank you very much, Dan. I really appreciate your time. We'll share that info. And to the support staff and attendees, thank you for attending. This concludes the 2021 SAIS Heartland trip. Deja and I will produce a summary report in the next 4 to 6 weeks. But thank you very much for attending. And if you have any questions, feel free to email Deja and I. Thank you.